なんやその歌。
いや、なんでもない。
歌えばええやないか。あんたには諦めんことの重要さを教わったわ。俺も執着するで。真島五郎っちゅう男の生き方に。最近は回りくどいことする極道ばかりや。俺みたいな極道はもう古いのかもしれんの。登場会支える仕事ばっかりしとったらいつの間にか牙抜けてしもうた。もう俺の時代は終わったんや。入るときはノックぐらいするんが礼儀やで。
Convictions are the embers of fleeting moments. We spend the rest of our lives keeping them from going out. The fires of our youth, those crowning achievements and exciting adventures, they form a basis for who we are. We are shaped by our experiences and in turn strive to burn those shapes into the woodwork of the world, to leave a mark, a stain, a scar to be remembered by. At least, it's how we feel at the height of our resolve. In the window of time when action yields triumph, when your emotions run hot, your feet dig deep into the sand, and untold strength flares across your body. But fires die. Kindling goes out. Hot turns lukewarm. The intensity you met the world with yesterday is a memory. The blood you boiled simmers now. The raging tempest of your desires has quieted down, and it becomes harder and harder to fan the flames of who you are, until eventually you just want to forget about your ambitions, about yourself, about everything. Teetering on this brink of self-destruction, weary and tired, it should be easy to let go, to surrender yourself to the cold, still, silent stagnation. But sometimes, in the smoldering pile of ashes of what once was, is what set you ablaze to begin with. Let's get our facts straight. Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii is a terrible name. This logo is atrocious. This box art is embarrassing. The premise of this new entry in the Like a Dragon franchise is absurd, wacky, and all those peccadillos fans identify this series with. But make no mistake, Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, or as I will refer to it from here on out, Majima Gaiden, is classic Like a Dragon. I know a couple of folks will disagree with me, and I can't blame them for it. Allow me to state my case. What I thought was going to be another fun but weightless spin-off title I could casually frame with quick talking points has turned out to be a fundamental addition to a grand tapestry of a series I have been divided by many times over. It features a thoughtful, powerful understanding of its eponymous character and takes on a journey of discovery, adventure, and closure. Goro Majima wakes up on an island off the coast of Hawaii without his memories. Saved by a young boy named Noah, he repays the favor by fighting off a group of thugs who, confusingly, are dressed as and claim to be old-fashioned pirates. After the fight, Noah has to stop Majima from brutalizing one of these assailants, and in the process, the amnesiac remembers something important about his past life. And Noah has an interesting reaction to it.
裏社会の人間や喧嘩、暴力、なんでもありのな。
喧嘩強かったもんね。でも俺を助けてくれたんだし、かっこよかったよ。
そうか。
Noah leads Majima to his father's bar on the tiny island, the bar Esperanza. Jason Rich is a burnt-out drunk, wary of strangers, wary of excitement, and very protective of his family. Noah explains how his father used to be a great treasure hunter, sailing the seas for riches. Jason clocks Majima as a Yakuza immediately, and thanks to other bar guests, they're able to piece together where someone might recognize him. Nele Island, where the remnants of the Tojo clan are currently moving nuclear waste back to their respective countries. Night falls. Noah and Majima have a heart-to-heart about the boy's desires to see the world and leave the tiny island his father has secluded him in. Majima makes a deal. As thanks for helping him, he'll take Noah out on an adventure. I often laud Yakuza 2 for its intense character study of Kazuma Kiryu. It doesn't take much effort to view Yakuza 2's eccentric cast as representative of the man its narrative revolves around. I deeply enjoy viewing Yakuza 2 through this lens, despite its obsession with secret Koreans and all the issues this brings. Yakuza 2 is to Kazuma Kiryu what Majima Gaiden is to Goro Majima. It quickly becomes evident what these characters represent for our protagonist. It's not a mystery to anyone watching what role Majima serves in this dynamic. In these initial cutscenes, he naturally adopts a paternal attitude, not just with respect to Noah, but Jason as well. In the story of Majima Gaiden, Goro Majima is a grandfather. He's helping Noah see the world, but he's also helping Jason get back on his feet. You might balk at the idea of making Majima some kind of family guy, but it's been a fixture of the character since as early as Yakuza 5. The Majima saga in Kiwami 2 used its short runtime to have the character reflect on where his life would have taken him had the events of Yakuza 0 played out differently, going so far as to portray Majima's subordinates as surrogate children he looks out for. Without his memories, without being able to recall the family he already has, Majima immediately begins speaking to the rich family as his children and grandchildren because this is inherently part of his identity. Underneath the family dynamic Majima Gaiden establishes are the aspects of Majima Jason and Noah represent. Jason embodies Majima's exhaustion, burnt out, washed up, and afraid of being unable to protect what's important to him. He is the side of Majima we've seen in Yakuza 4, Yakuza 5, Kiwami 2, and Infinite Wealth. The older Majima whose edge has been dulled over the years. And Noah is the core of who Majima is. This inner child who yearns for adventure, freedom, and conquering the world around him. The unstoppable aura of the youthful Majima at the end of Yakuza 0. If Haruka embodies Kiryu's innocence or his desire to always do what's right, then Noah embodies Majima's willfulness or his desire to chase his ambitions. Over the course of the Like a Dragon franchise, we've seen the Mad Dog from Yakuza 0 erode, recover, and whittle himself down again. We've seen him grow old and lose sight of what he wants or perhaps what he thinks he is capable of. Doubt has slowly encroached upon the essence of Goro Majima, and without the burden of his ego to stop him, he is finally able to confront it. When Majima steps in to stop Jason from raising his hand against Noah, when he asks him,
"よう考えて喋れや。まさかノアのせいなんて言わんやろな."
he's having a conversation with himself, asking himself to relinquish the bitterness he's harbored over the years. To admit he's been so overprotective of his convictions that he's run himself aground, stranding himself in an ocean of possibilities.
狭いのはもう嫌なんだ。わかるでしょ？だって父ちゃんも昔はそうだったんだから。
It's a conversation ending in his willfulness grasping control away from the doubts and exhaustion pushing down against it. In keeping his promise to Noah, Majima is keeping the promise he made to himself so many years ago. The course is set, the sails catch wind, and Majima journeys forth to rediscover who he truly is.
さあ旅だとまだ見ぬ世界へと
If you've seen my other videos on the Like a Dragon series, you know I have a high bar for what Like a Dragon is capable of and what I want to see out of it. Not to tickle my own ego, but I recognize myself as having one of the most critical perspectives of this franchise on this platform. I also like Yakuza Dead Souls a whole lot, so I like to think I'm pretty reasonable with where and when I leverage my critiques of the series. A specific issue I've taken with recent Like a Dragon offerings is the apathy towards cutscene direction. This franchise is famous for letting its actors chew scenery in long cutscenes rivaling the ones in Metal Gear Solid. It has a well-established history of framing scenes in interesting ways to convey meaning onto its exposition. And it's most likely because series creator Toshihiro Nagoshi is a huge movie buff with an education in film studies. Nagoshi used his passion for film to give Like a Dragon an edge over its contemporaries. Actual cinematography. Recently though, the overall quality of Like a Dragon's cutscenes has taken a dip, including titles being developed at RGG Studio while Nagoshi was still overseeing production before his departure in 2021. His role at Sega had been elevated and subsequently downscaled before he left, so it's not too difficult to correlate the decline in Like a Dragon cinematography with Nagoshi's fluctuating roles, his preparation to leave the company, and the increased workload and further distance from Like a Dragon his promotion likely caused. I don't have hard evidence to back this up, but it's a fair assumption. Sorry for the tangent, but it's important context when describing newer cutscenes in the series. Dialogues are shot with flat, uninteresting angles. Characters sit or stand around, never moving from their marks, never doing anything interesting. The camera will focus on a random object in the room because it's vaguely relevant to the conversation, but it isn't framed in any meaningful way. There's no sense of blocking, the 180-degree rule is broken all the time, scenes rarely have dynamic action, and to be clear, Majima Gaiden still has this issue here and there, but watching cutscenes in this entry feels like I'm looking at a Like a Dragon title from the 2000s. Majima Gaiden is trying to convey meaning through its visual language. When characters are sitting around and talking, there's some sort of action going on in the scene, or the camera is moving and angled in an engaging way. When it isn't trying to tell us something important, it's at least trying to be interesting. A great example of this happens early on when the writers decide to lampshade the language barrier between Majima and Noah.
少年の名前はノアで10歳。ほんまは言葉わからんで一苦労やったんやけど、そこは以下省略や。
This is a genuinely funny cutaway gag. My only complaint is I wish Majima Gaiden continued to do it more often. For the most part, this series shies away from showcasing action outside of gameplay segments, but Majima Gaiden has more than a few examples of interesting action.
船長。ほう、悪ないの。
This is a well-choreographed fight scene. The HEMA people might have something to say about how Majima is using his swords in it, but other kinds of action are shot effectively to get a good reaction out of the audience. Madlantis itself is a huge visual metaphor for the perception others have of Goro Majima. It's got mad in its name. How could it not be? Madlantis is part of a spectacle. The participants in the ship battles there dress and play the part in order to give the crowd something to look at. They are all in on the romantic image of swashbucklers and glory. It's not a stretch to compare the way the people of Madlantis behave to the core tenets of the Mad Dog himself. This idea of doing what you want to do and not caring about how you'll look to everyone else. The difference is, Majima isn't putting on an act. It becomes painfully clear to him and the player that underneath this literal superficial set dressing, Madlantis is nothing more than an underground of seedy people looking to hoard money and power. None of them truly respect the values of freedom or adventure pirates inspire in the layman. None of them care for camaraderie or solidarity against adversity. Madlantis and its denizens are a bastardization and misunderstanding of who Majima is as a person. It might be more accurate to say they represent the way he thinks others see him. An unpredictable, loose cannon wild man who does anything to get what he wants. It's a corrupted image of who he is, breeding doubts about his convictions within his mind. As Majima tears Madlantis apart by rising through its ranks in the Colosseum and challenging its leaders, he's dismantling the pretenders. He's reclaiming this aspect of his identity. There's a big reason why the pacing and cutscene direction in Majima Gaiden are effective. The writing is consistently focused on delivering these ideas about Majima we've been discussing. And I believe the writing is consistent because Majima Gaiden is a much shorter title and is free of the overbearing continuity traps RGG Studio created for Kazuma Kiryu. The man who erased his name contends with an ambiguous faction whose motives and modus operandi constantly change to suit the needs of the specific chapter they feature in, and the situation Kiryu is in is too restrictive for a series built off the back of juxtaposing him to other characters who help create nuance and comprehension about whatever idea the specific story they're in wants to deliver. On the flip side, Majima easily lends himself to eccentric situations, and while gaining some closure in Kiwami 2's Majima Saga, had a few loose threads left on his person the writers could pull on to weave a new story out of. Infinite Wealth boasts a 200-hour runtime, needing a narrative girth to match. It makes weird decisions for characters, creating subplots and sympathy for too many villains who can't fit in the spotlight together, and flattens Ichiban Kasuga into a helpless oaf. Majima Gaiden can be more or less completed in its entirety in about 50 hours. It keeps its narrative revolving around this character and his search for secret treasure, literally and figuratively. Because of this, it finds time for other characters from Majima's peanut gallery to show up and add perspective to the way the rest of the world sees him. This feeds back into how characters in this story represent Majima in different ways, creating a powerful narrative with understanding of the character it's about, using it to provide us with thoughtful concepts to think about, almost like what stories are supposed to do. Majima Gaiden is another great piece of evidence pointing to my claim of RGG Studio being way better at telling shorter, simpler, tighter stories. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is what older Like a Dragon entries were, with one exception being Yakuza 5 according to a decent part of the community, but even Yakuza 5 handled its narrative as smaller blocks circling around specific characters and then tying everything together at the end. This storytelling structure is a fundamental aspect of Like a Dragon's identity. It compels us to follow Kiryu through the original Yakuza trilogy, it endears us to Shun Akiyama and Taiga Saejima in Yakuza 4, it brings us to tears watching Shinada in Yakuza 5, and it's the way Majima Gaiden tells its story. And it might have been a total accident. At least it's the feeling I get when reading some of the interviews about Majima Gaiden. Executive producer and co-writer Masayoshi Yokoyama seems to have a very different read on the character than I do. When asked to describe Majima in an interview with PlayStation Blog Japan, Yokoyama had this to say.
He masks his feelings and hides his true self. His past is mentioned throughout the series, yet the true Majima remains a puzzle. He feels the need to live up to the image that others have of him and adeptly go along with them. However, in this entry, he suffers from amnesia, exposing his true self as the story unfolds.
Considering the majority of people currently invested in this franchise had their first exposure to Majima in Yakuza 0, this is a bizarre take from one of its writers. The fundamental lesson the character walks away from Yakuza 0 with is the resolve to live life the way he wants. Majima's obnoxious and wild personality isn't an act so much as a commitment to being unfettered by his circumstances and the people around him. If he decides being serious is how he wants to approach something, then he does so. It's not him dropping an act, it's consistent with his convictions. In an interview for The Gamer, chief producer Hiroyuki Sakamoto had this to say about Majima being the protagonist of his own entry.
It's Majima. You can't make a serious Majima game, really. If we're trying to make a game based around him, it's gotta be over the top. You can't have Majima and then try to make a really rounded emotional story. That was probably the first major influence that made us pick the direction for the game.
Again, even if you don't have any experience with the Like a Dragon franchise besides Yakuza 0, this statement is painfully confusing to hear. Majima has stolen the emotional spotlight multiple times in the past. One of his most endearing qualities as a character, brought forth by Hidenari Ugaki's amazing performance, is the emotional range he has, and previous titles have been aware of this. He's not stoic like Kiryu or a walking golden retriever like Ichiban, but he is a well-rounded, complex character all the same. The producers on Like a Dragon don't seem to feel the same way. Yokoyama continues in that interview with PlayStation Blog Japan.
When a character like Majima becomes the protagonist, it creates a discrepancy between actions and emotions. When you get frustrated in a scene, but Majima does not even look bothered, you may feel confused. To avoid that, we would need a neutral character who could act the way players anticipate from a protagonist. But the downside is that you'd end up with a boring protagonist. We gave Kiryu and Kasuga additional personalities to build them into protagonists. But if we did that to Majima, he'd turn out to be a boring guy. To make him a protagonist, we only had two options: amnesia or travel back in time. Without amnesia, Majima wouldn't have worked as a protagonist.
I have a lot of questions about Yokoyama's design process, but I get immensely weird vibes from this. There's no hard set rule about your protagonist needing to synergize with your emotional perspective in every scene, and there's plenty of great examples in this franchise. And I don't know what he's getting at. A protagonist who feels things the audience doesn't is confusing, but the opposite of this is a protagonist who is boring. But we made Kiryu and Ichiban protagonists the audience shares feelings with by giving them additional personalities. But this is boring, but it's only boring if we did that to Majima, so in order to make Majima not boring, we would have to go back in time to when Majima was more like Kiryu or Ichiban to give him the boring things that aren't boring if we do it to Kiryu and Ichiban, or we would have to give Majima amnesia in order for him to be given boring qualities, making him not boring but also not confusing, even though the qualities we gave him were all qualities he already had? So wait, hold on. Does that mean Majima is a boring and confusing protagonist to begin Majima with? A boring character who can't be a protagonist? Or does he gain boring and then does he lose the boring Yakuza 0? And does Majima's arc in Yakuza 0 make him a boring character? None of this makes sense if you believe Majima is already enough of an interesting character to be a protagonist. This entire quote relies on thinking Majima is a one-dimensional, barely existent character in the series, and we all know this isn't true. Sakamoto and Yokoyama seem to be speaking with zero faith in the premise of Majima Gaiden to begin with. But if you look at what they've made, there truly is a deeper understanding of the character and what they were making than these quotes would imply. It just feels like the versions of them answering these questions are completely different to the ones actually making the thing. There's almost an apprehension being expressed here, as if this entry in their series was a throwaway idea they didn't want to focus on. And maybe this is why it has a lot of classic elements absent in recent Like a Dragon titles? Instead of trying to make it bigger than the last one or doing wild things like casting a bunch of celebrities and creating exciting twists and turns, they made a normal Like a Dragon. Here's another quote from Sakamoto in the Gamer interview I thought worth mentioning. He says,
Fan speculation has been getting more and more accurate, because the fans are getting so good at figuring out what we're probably going to be doing. We have to think of ways to think outside of the box and come from a different direction so that we can surprise our fans. But otherwise, they're like, yeah, I know what you're gonna do.
really weird quote, not just because it clashes with Yokoyama's statement about Majima as a protagonist, but also because Majima Gaiden is probably one of the more predictable stories in the franchise. Whether or not it's good is besides this fact. It's compelling because it's well told, not because it does things I didn't expect it to do. Actually, the one thing I didn't expect it to do was remind me of old Yakuza storytelling. In a weird way, the surprise was they told a good story. This is what I've been wrestling with since playing Majima Gaiden. Why? Why is this spin-off truer to the identity of the series than other entries in the last 5 years? What was different about this one's development? Identifying this is a pipe dream, since I would need first-hand accounts from people who work at our GC studio. If you happen to be one of those people, send me an email or something. We can make it off the record if you want. I can't promise I'll do anything with it, but I'd at least like to know. All I have are guesses, none of which are definitive proof. My best ones are recognizing Ryosuke Hori, the writer for the Majima saga in Kiwami 2 and the director for Like a Dragon 7 and 8, has a more involved producer and chief director credit on this entry, and Masayoshi Yokoyama does not. Hori proved he knew what directions to take the character in with the Majima saga. It wouldn't surprise me to find out part of his role on Majima Gaiden was ensuring it followed the development the character has had over the years. Now, Yokoyama doesn't have a producer credit on Majima Gaiden, but he is credited for original story and total direction. This is an executive direction role, not to be confused with the regular director's position, which was filled by Yasuaki Uehara, a series veteran since Yakuza 4 and director of the Ishin remake, which I quite enjoyed up until the end. As the person most in charge at RGG Studio, Yokoyama most likely still had a lot of decision power during Majima Gaiden's development, but given their other projects currently in progress, I imagine he wasn't as hands-on as he's notoriously known for being. A lot of his responses in interviews about this entry seemed to come from a bird's eye view of what they ended up doing, so I'm confident in my assumption, but again, I don't have hard evidence to support what I'm saying. Of course, no modern Like a Dragon team is complete without Tsuyoshi Furuta, who is credited as the script writer and for acting direction, and I just don't know anymore. I don't understand. It shouldn't make any sense why I enjoy this Furuta-written work when all of his previous stuff has been middling at best. I don't think my assessments of previous titles in the series are unfounded. Something is clearly different about Majima Gaiden. I can point out what is different and how, but I can't pinpoint why. Does Furuta work better under certain producers or directors? Are different leaders more forthright with asking him to change certain things? Maybe he does a lot of what I don't like about his writing when specific people are asking him to do it. Maybe it was Uehara's and Hori's direction style, or Yokoyama being busy with other projects. I just don't know what's changed between Infinite Wealth and this. Even my assumption of it being people in different roles is kind of wishy-washy, considering everyone at RGG Studio wears 50 hats they rotate out of every project. They've all been involved in almost every part of the process at one point or another. It's hard to believe their contributions don't extend well past what they're credited for. I'm inclined to believe this was seen as a quirky spin-off, and relatively more important projects were and are currently in development, so the folks in the roles they usually play weren't playing them or weren't as involved, and the people who care about the money were focusing on those bigger, potentially more profitable, and definitely more expensive projects. This allowed other ideas or angles of approach to emerge during Majima Gaiden's development, resulting in or even forcing something similar to classic Like a Dragon storytelling, as opposed to whatever new direction the main entries are aiming for. the apathy I'm speculating about sounds like it has a negative connotation, but I think it's a blessing in disguise. As we continue to explore the many ways Majima Gaiden embodies the golden age of the franchise, you're going to notice a trend where elements of this entry are not as deep, expansive, or extreme as recent predecessors, yet feel a lot better to interact with. I might not have the 100% confirmed answer, but I have enough experience with this franchise to give you a fairly well-studied opinion on it. In case you couldn't tell by how much time we've already spent together, this is gonna be a big old video. But I fell in love with Majima Gaiden, and I would like to try to get it across to you, someone who might have played it and thought it was just okay, or even someone who absolutely hated it. This is for folks who felt burned by Like a Dragon in recent years. For those of you who are just starting to see what some of us have noticed for a while now. For folks who missed the retrospectives I used to make on this series and have been waiting for me to have a largely positive experience with it again. It's been long overdue, and I am very ready to hand out some flowers. I've gotten a lot of questions about how I feel about the Yakuza 0 director's cut. I haven't really put it into a video yet, so let's talk about it. First and foremost, this is not a director's cut. The director for Yakuza 0, I believe his name is, I think it's Kazuki Hosokawa. He's not with the company. He's not with RGG Studio. He hasn't been with RGG Studio for many years now. The idea, the notion that this is a director's cut is just not true. And given the content of this director's cut, I don't know if he would want to be associated with it. In the director's cut, in order to get more people to play it, not just new fans or new potential audience members, but also existing ones who own Nintendo consoles, they've added about 25 minutes of extra cutscenes and a brand new multiplayer mode. That's the director's cut. That's the director's vision, which, as we've already established, is not the case because the director isn't there anymore. He had nothing to do with this project. I don't need to play through Yakuza 0 again just to watch a couple of cutscenes. So I went out and I watched them. If this invalidates my opinion of the director's cut in your eyes, I don't know, go get your eyes checked. And my God, I think it's really fascinating that you could look at the story of Yakuza 0 and the way it is told, and then add cutscenes to the director's cut that actively undermine all of the emotional payoff and all of the investment and tension and stakes of your story, despite their claims that they were already made in the original production of Yakuza 0. A lot of these cutscenes seem to really be focused on ideas that RGG Studio has been following up on way after Yakuza 0 was a thing. In Like a Dragon, people die and they stay dead, except after Like a Dragon 7. And everything after Like a Dragon 7, they constantly are just bringing characters back to reuse them and recycle them because designing new characters is hard, I guess. And I hesitate to believe the claim these cutscenes were made originally because they are completely opposite of the tone, of the mood, of the ideas present in the original Yakuza 0. They literally do not match up. It is as if you are looking at a completely different game with a completely different writer. Just bizarre choices made. They do not help. They make the story actively worse. I fundamentally believe that. I think most of us are in agreement, if not all of us are in agreement, that these new cutscenes are just terrible. Terrible. Again, there's no way these cutscenes were made during the original production of Yakuza 0. There's just no way. I refuse to believe that. I think that's a lie. You wouldn't make a cutscene that makes a very fan favorite character look better in the eyes of like a moral compass without having the hindsight of, oh, people really like this character. Let's make him more likable in that case. Come on. Also, the new multiplayer mode sucks. When they announced it, I speculated that a lot of these characters would just have their boss fights mapped onto player controls. So their moveset would be whatever their moveset was during their boss fight, but you would hit a button to play essentially the animation of the attack. And because those weren't designed for player controls in mind, they would feel really bad in your hands. And that is absolutely what happened here. The game mode is a time trial. So you have to beat enemies as fast as possible. And when you're locked into these elaborate animations, you are wasting time. So what ends up happening is, instead of playing as any boss character, you're better off playing as the jobbers, the normal dudes who have really basic movesets and really simple animations, because that will inevitably be better than playing as any of your favorite characters that you would have ideally wanted to play as. And you could play with friends online, you could play with random people online, but for those of you that don't like to do that, or maybe don't want to pay for Nintendo Switch Online, because honestly, really probably shouldn't for this mode to begin with, if you don't already have it, there is a solo play mode. And you would think, well, I can upgrade my fighters, and some of those fighters show up in missions to help me. And you would think, oh, let me upgrade these guys so that when they show up in my solo play and I generate CPUs to play as them, they will also be higher leveled so that solo play is achievable. They will still show up as level 1 fighters in solo play if they show up in your mission. Missions suck, they take too long, they don't give you enough money to upgrade your characters. You have to repeat the first mission over and over again. I believe there's only 5 missions that you can do. So there isn't even that much to do. It's literally just grind to play like 5 missions. In true modern Ryuga Gotoku fashion, they have taken a 30-minute, hour-long piece of gameplay and found a way to arbitrarily stretch it into like a 20-hour time investment that is completely not worth it. And that's Yakuza 0's director's cut. It sucks. This is arguably one of the worst ways to play this game, in my opinion, because you cannot disable the extended cutscenes. I think if somebody wants to start playing like a dragon, I used to tell people play the PS2 Yakuza 1 and just play things in order of release on their original hardware. But over time, I've sort of warmed up to the idea of people starting with Yakuza 0. And I think now there's a little caveat, there's a little asterisk next to my recommendation to play Yakuza 0 as your first one, and it's do not play the director's cut. You will get most of what people like about this game from the director's cut, but those extra cutscenes ruin some of the game's best moments. I mean, it actively spoils stuff, and then punctuates it all with a huge lampshade moment of Kiryu and Nishiki sitting in a car talking about how silly the entire thing was, almost alluding to like the idea that the story itself is kind of like ridiculous and absurd, which is really weird considering it's one of the better told stories in the series. So it's really strange that this cutscene that was supposedly made during its production would go out of its way to belittle that production and that final story. It really does feel like they wanted to disrespect somebody by adding these cutscenes in. It really feels like they are like insulting their own thing in order to spite the people they worked alongside of to make it, who are no longer there. So yeah, that's this. This is a load of garbage. This is trash. I firmly believe it. Everything that this version adds is terrible. Yakuza 0, still a great game. Still a phenomenal game. These changes, god awful. Anyway, back to the Majima Gaiden video.
まあ日はノアも島の外に出れたら夢は叶った。
もうこれで俺らの冒険終わり？せっかく船長にもなったのに。
そうやな。どないしよう。
そんなのまず治療を受けてから考えろ。この先ずっと記憶喪失のままでいいのか？ヤクザの大幹部だったんだろ。
Apprehension is at the beginning of all great change. It is part of our human instinct, a hesitation to commit to the new, the different, or the unknown. It gives us time to weigh our options, to examine our past in order to inform our decisions for the future. to collect ourselves and take stock of what change might do to our way of life and the people in it. The longer we go without change, the more reasons we can think of to avoid it. But apprehension is a false king in a court of deception. It hides the collective truth. Apprehension will only ever give you reason to do away with change. It will never provide you with the reasons to embrace it. The king enjoys his crown, after all. But change is born from desperation, desire, and determination. It comes from within. Apprehension is merely a reaction to a deeper, stronger sensation. Change is a rebellion of the soul against its destruction. If you want to be better, if you want to be different, you have to accept your shortcomings. You have to champion this rebellion and risk the consequences. You must fight your own resistance against it. On the surface, Majima sets out to give Noah a tour of the world outside the small island he's been sequestered to. Majima is also setting out to recover his memories. Given what I've already described, the subtext here is obvious. Majima setting out to show Noah the world and simultaneously relearn his identity is one big metaphor for soul-searching and self-discovery. Just read the lyrics to the opening musical number, "To the me I've yet to meet." Yeah, I know. You thought it was just a silly theatrical element, but no. The song is verbatim telling you what the story is about. As they hop from one island to the next, to Nele, to Madlantis, to Honolulu, Majima meets several people. Queen Michelle and Raymond Law of Madlantis, Teruhiko Shigaki, leader of the ex-Tojo Yakuza helping remove the nuclear waste on Nele Island, and Rodriguez, one of several Palekana Haku overseeing the ex-Yakuza's work. Through these interactions, Majima learns about the Esperanza treasure, a mysterious and undiscovered collection of gold and artifacts supposedly missing for centuries. Rumored among it is an elixir said to prolong life and cure any illness or disease. The major players Majima meets are all on the hunt for the Esperanza. When he learns about it, his interest is piqued, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The crew's first stop on their adventure is Nele Island, a key location in Infinite Wealth and now the center of a major international scandal. The amnesiac Majima is reintroduced to Shigaki and Majima's subordinates Nishida and Minami. Majima is told he fell overboard after his boat was attacked by a giant squid on his initial departure from Nele Island. Shigaki stresses the importance of getting Majima home in order to receive medical assistance for his amnesia and mentions Taiga Saejima, Majima's sworn brother, is already on his way. Not one to remain idle for long, the Goro Maru crew leaves Nele Island to see Madlantis. They participate in the Colosseum battles there and gain the favor of Queen Michelle. Shortly thereafter, Jason and Masaru, the ship's cook played by comedian Ryuji Akiyama, share their knowledge of the Esperanza treasure. Jason explains his treasure hunting past revolved around it to cure his son of his incredibly mild illness. The crew learns from Jason's daughter Naomi, who happens to be Queen Michelle's secretary, the treasure's whereabouts on Nele Island. She tells Majima all the groups currently on the island, including Shigaki's ex-Yakuza and Rodriguez's Palekana, are trying to find the treasure before anyone else. Majima is offered a deal for finding the treasure on behalf of Queen Michelle, given information on his rivals in the treasure hunt, and several leads to chase. The crew returns to Nele Island to confront Shigaki about trying to send Majima away and keeping the treasure a secret. A fight ensues. Majima wins, and he offers Shigaki an alliance. Help him find the treasure, and they'll split the reward. Jason asks if it's wise to forgive so easily. Majima responds,
人間誰でも間違いはある
At face value, this is standard pirate/treasure hunting fare. A fun story where everyone's hiding what they know from everyone else. Uneasy alliances allow them to make progress on their search, but at any moment the group can turn in on itself. Greater mysteries abound as the elusive treasure is further kept secret by those willing to throw it all away in the name of fame and fortune. Man, I love pirate stuff. Much like the secrets these characters are keeping from one another, there is more happening beneath the surface. I think you'll agree, if this is just coincidence, then it is one hell of a coincidence. Teruhiko Shigaki is portrayed by Munetaka Aoki in the Japanese performance. Aoki lends his physical likeness to the character as well. Munetaka Aoki is the actor who plays Majima in the Like a Dragon Amazon Prime miniseries. In this story, Shigaki and his ex-Yakuza tie Majima back to the life he's led, and they're kind of incompetent. The reason Majima knows Shigaki is looking for the treasure is because Shigaki is unable to keep his men from going to Madlantis, or their mouths shut. In losing to Majima, Shigaki also explains how he and his men have removed themselves from the ex-Tojo group entirely. They've risked everything to search for the Esperanza and have made little progress in finding it. Representing an incompetent past, Shigaki and the ex-Yakuza are Majima's mistakes. Shigaki himself is an embodiment of how Majima perceives his mistakes, all of his failures personified, including that Like a Dragon show. Whap whap. Shigaki luring Majima away from the treasure, insisting he go back to Japan, is Majima's past failures dissuading him from pursuing what he is looking for. And Majima, trying to avoid confronting those failures, brushes them off. Shigaki and his men then go as far as to dress themselves as Palekana and kidnap Noah in an attempt to throw Majima off course. We often use our failures to discourage ourselves from change. Failures fuel our personal fears, but failure is deceitful. Failure obscures success. It kidnaps your ambitions under false pretenses. Majima confronting Shigaki with the truth is Majima confronting himself and acknowledging his failures.
人生大逆転の大博打が海賊のお宝頼み。アホやなお前ら。気に入ったでしがき。お前はようやっとる。それでこそ男っちゅうんや。
When Majima offers an alliance with Shigaki, when he forgives Shigaki, he is forgiving himself for his past mistakes. But more than forgiveness, he is also joining Shigaki with him. He is accepting his failures have made him who he is. They are the reason he is strong enough to see this journey through. Majima has forgiven himself for his past mistakes, and now, on the cusp of exploring this great change within himself, must come face to face with the external pressures he's internalized. He begins to worry if his efforts are a bit selfish, about the duty he has to the people who need him.
わけあるかい。なんで俺から隠れなあかんのや。やっと会えたな兄弟。しかしお前、なんやその格好。
Who better to represent Majima's sense of duty than his sworn brother? The guy who did the big job, did his jail time, saved the Tojo, went back to jail to do more time, and then came out to continue his service to the family. Saejima is here to take Majima home. The first thing he does is mock Majima's new look. Majima's sense of duty is making light of what Majima is doing. Majima is belittling himself for pursuing a personal endeavor. He has so much responsibility that he's guilt-tripping himself for not abandoning the pursuit entirely and going back to his status quo. Saejima then doubts Majima's amnesia. He uses this doubt to reason and bargain with Majima. This is Majima trying to rationalize or find an excuse to stop doing what he's doing. He is trying to diminish the value of taking care of himself over committing to his responsibilities. This is a turning point. Majima, having just forgiven himself for past mistakes, is now asking himself if it's okay to set aside his responsibilities to do something he feels is important. When he responds to Saejima in the standoffish way he does, he's cutting the doubt off. He's stopping himself from catastrophizing.
アホか。記憶喪失のもんが どうやって聞き捨てならん言葉区別できんのや。そんなんそっちで聞き捨てるんが思いやりっちゅうもんやろ。
Not only is this potentially a fun nod to Saejima representing an aspect of Majima as opposed to being the character we usually recognize him as in this situation, but it's also Majima fighting back against the guilt his sense of duty is causing him to feel. He's evaluating how important this search for the Esperanza is to him, and admitting he's entitled to being a little selfish once in a while. The Saejima-Majima fight is Majima prioritizing himself. It's him dealing with the stress and anxiety of having others depend on him, and working through it to understand those people will be fine without him for a while. When Saejima joins the crew later on, it's Majima aligning his needs with being able to help the people in his life effectively. It's a shift in the way he views his sense of duty. Making a big change without knowing how it will affect you is not easy. Your failures and responsibilities rise to create apprehension. And if you aren't willing to accept potential failure, then you can't change. If you don't give yourself time to make it happen, then change never happens. But it's important not to lose sight of everything else around you either. Majima knows he can't keep sailing around the world forever. Eventually, the journey has to reach some kind of conclusion. So he promises Noah he'll find the Esperanza, help cure his incredibly mild illness, and call it even. With his mind made up, the real adventure begins. One where he may have to confront some harrowing truths. Esperanza is Spanish for hope. The Esperanza treasure is, therefore, Majima's hope. It's his hope for the future, but at the moment, it's a solution to getting old, becoming irrelevant, going back to when his life wasn't wearing him out, etc. On the surface, he's doing it for Noah, to cure Noah of his incredibly mild illness. But the subtext is he's chasing after his past. He's looking for some theoretical fix to make everything go back to the way it was. Regaining his memories, finding the treasure, and curing Noah all facilitate this hunt for a proverbial white whale. With a bigger crew and an even bigger span of ocean to explore, the Goromaru sets sail once again. This time on the hunt for Esperanza, for hope. An adventure to discover who you are is a great basis for a piece of pirate fiction. Whether the setting influenced the story or vice versa is unknown to me, but it doesn't change Majima Gaiden using the pirate premise as a powerful paradigm to tell its tale. One of the key defining elements of treasure hunting pirate stories is the treasure's dubious existence. Or more accurately, the treasure is real, but not in the way its finders expect. Romantic pirate stories, not kissy romance. Romance as in an idealized and larger-than-life representation, use the uncertainty of what lies at the end of the journey to produce unexpected twists or add nuance to what exactly its protagonists are searching for. Yada yada yada, you should read One Piece. Despite taking place in the modern day, Majima Gaiden stays true to its overall pirate theme. Granted, it does it in the way RGG Studio commits to anything, which is unintentionally remain vague about how extensive various mechanics and features are, so the internet hype beasts over-speculate, exaggerate, and promote the product for you. For free. Seriously, stop doing this. Like a Dragon's uneven implementation of its ideas is something I'll talk about later in this video, but I happen to be a big fan of pirate stuff, so I was more than ready to examine how Majima Gaiden measures up to other pirate games I've played before, especially with ship combat and traversing an ocean as opposed to walking through an urban environment. In an interview with Automaton about this, Ryosuke Hori claims to have personally blocked out outside influence from other games. He says,
I think it's fine for other members of the team to play other games with similar themes and use them as inspiration, but as the person making the final decisions, if I were to get used to how naval combat works in other games, my sense of what feels right for Yakuza players, who might have never played those types of games before, could get distorted.
He then continues by saying,
for Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, our top priority was making a naval combat game that even our players could enjoy. That's why I focused on directing a game that strikes a balance between the uniqueness and realism that is typical of the franchise. So rather than worrying about what other naval-themed games did, I tried to think of something uniquely Yakuza-like that would satisfy these requirements.
It wasn't my intention to build a narrative in this video about the weird dissonance between what people who make this series say about making this series and what we can see with our own eyeballs, but come on, look at it. With all due respect, there's no way in hell you happened to make ship combat almost identical to every other kind of ship combat you can find in a video game since Assassin's Creed 3. Even if we're to believe the very close-minded idea of Japanese game devs not playing or being aware of Western games, East 10 Nordics was released in 2023 and has an incredibly similar ship combat structure to Majima Gaiden. Granted, Hori is clear in his statement about it being a personal policy, not a company mandate. However, this then makes the entire statement he's making kind of irrelevant. If he's not preventing employees from building off of inspirations, and he's trying to ensure the average Like a Dragon player would enjoy it, then I don't think it matters if he's blocking out examples for himself or not. I also think it's a strange comment because it assumes Like a Dragon fans have only ever engaged with Like a Dragon and don't know what Assassin's Creed is. Even so, if you want it to feel good, then just evaluate it based on whether or not it feels good. It seems weird to base your tuning of this feature around how it compares to the way everything else in your series feels, as opposed to aiming for a higher standard you could potentially elevate the series with. Anyway, my initial reaction to ship combat in Majima Gaiden wasn't positive. I played the demo before the full version was released and was immediately let down by ship movement. The Goro Maru feels too light. Steering left and right lacks the weight I want out of naval vehicles, and there isn't enough inertia to fight against when quickly changing directions. Yeah, I wanted it to be slower, heavier. I braced for how this would feel in the context of the whole experience, and fully expected ship combat to be one of Like a Dragon's notorious half measures when implementing a new mechanic or mode of some kind. But after doing every Colosseum battle, after fighting random encounters against ships out on the ocean, and getting a handle on how ship combat in Majima Gaiden is designed, I warmed up to it. The Goro Maru is light and maneuverable because ship battles in Majima Gaiden are less about careful positioning and more about countering enemy attacks. Enemy ships are programmed to lure you into spacing traps. If you charge one head on, it plays chicken with you and then turns at the last minute to fire its broadside cannons. If you give chase, it fires mortar shells to kite you through a ton of damage. Stronger ships will stay in place and fire homing missiles as you approach, forcing you to change direction. When facing multiple ships at once, you navigate through a barrage of their attacks to flank them. The Goro Maru is able to boost out of the way of danger and can drift in circular paths. Drifting is what makes ship combat enjoyable. The boost nets you enough speed for a solid drift, allowing you to position yourself parallel or perpendicular to the ship you want to attack. As enemies grow smarter, tougher, and larger in number, your understanding of how the Goro Maru handles and what you can do with it does as well. With enough boost charges, you can snake your way around a battlefield, dispatching enemies in your wake. I was surprised to see an extensive upgrade system in Majima Gaiden. You can improve the basics like boost charges and max health, but you can also customize the various ordnances the Goro Maru possesses. This includes swapping out standard cannons and machine guns for variants capable of applying status effects. You can poison ships, you can burn them, and you can freeze them, all of which confer different consequences. Enemy ships can apply status effects to the Goro Maru as well, and a decent chunk of ship combat is letting go of the helm, helping crewmates back up, putting out fires, and dropping smoke bombs to prevent enemy attacks while you patch up the holes. Skillfully moving through the arena and targeting enemies with the right weapons will achieve victory in a matter of seconds. This style of combat wouldn't be possible if the Goromaru was as heavy and slow as I wanted, and while the similarities to other naval warfare games is obvious, I like Majima Gaiden's take on it. It matches the frenetic pace of Like a Dragon street fights and maintains a certain consistency across all the action gameplay in it. So I suppose this is what Hori meant when he said he was trying to build it for fans of the series. Fair enough, Hori. You've made your point. The whole thing about blocking outside influences is still nonsense though. No pirate video game is complete without being captain of a crew. If you've played Like a Dragon titles in the last couple of years, you already have a good idea of how they've done this in Majima Gaiden. Except the crew is much bigger than anticipated. You assign folks to man the cannons, man the machine guns, and then you assign even more crew to boarding squads, each with its own leader. Every member has their own stat and level progression, their own special abilities activated when in leader or first mate positions, and contribute to the overall stats of your crew. Some crew members aren't fighters, instead serving as support roles. These give you special abilities during deck or crew battles. Crew battles are all-out brawls between yours and the enemy's crew, with captains capable of rallying their side with huge buffs. So basically, they're an improved version of the Coliseum battles from Man Who Erased His Name, combined with the tower defense minigames from Kiwami 2 and Yakuza 6. Given that Uehara also directed the Ishin remake, it's no surprise he'd want to bring back certain modes he thought would be useful here. So the dungeon explorations from Ishin are retooled into Treasure Island hunts. Only now, you have a squad of crewmates who disembark with you, providing decent backup and creating opportunities for unique heat moves. Treasure Islands are souped-up dungeons, with added challenge areas and generous healing items in order to make those challenges a little more unforgiving than otherwise. At the end of every Treasure Island is a treasure chest containing a unique piece of loot. Acquiring these raises your reputation as a pirate and gives you points you can spend on ability upgrades. The pirate aesthetic helps recontextualize evergreen or legacy playspots from the series with renewed interest. In a good mood, I call playspots like golfing, mahjong, shogi, and billiards the Legacy Collection. In a bad mood, I call them shovelware. Let's be perfectly honest, you're not doing all of that every Like a Dragon title. In the past, we'd see these minigames evolve and change in small but novel ways. Those days are gone, as is our interest in playing Oicho Kabu. But if you don't have legacy playspots filling out the map, then you don't have a Like a Dragon city. It's a catch-22 I think RGG Studio realizes they're in, and one I don't fault them for. All these minigames are feature complete anyway, might as well adjust the puzzle challenges to keep them fresh and throw them in. Legacy playspots build out the illusion of density in a Like a Dragon setting and are great starting points for designing the layouts of new cities, but it's safe to say they're largely ignored by most players now. We've just done it before, you know? It hasn't stopped RGG Studio from trying to spark renewed interest in its Legacy Collection, though. An admirable goal, with poor results in recent memory. I'm not spending what's going to feel like hours at the batting cages to farm enough home run points to unlock a heat move for a weapon I don't usually have on hand anyway. Rewards offered by Legacy playspots don't inspire me to spend time with them anymore. It's just not worth the redundancy and repetition. Majima Gaiden feels like the first time I have a good reason to revisit Legacy playspots in a long while. Those massive treasure chests catch the eye. You find out almost every Legacy playspot has a unique treasure and cosmetic item you can purchase with the points you collect from playing it. Because collecting treasure is also how you purchase new skills and upgrades, there's a compelling reason to earn the very reasonable amount of points you need to buy it. Suddenly, you're interacting with minigames again. Nothing has changed about the Legacy Collection, but the new incentive restores the original novelty you experienced the first time you played them. It's like when you pick up an old hobby or play with an old toy to show someone else how it works and think, oh yeah, I used to think this was super fun. It's a strong external reason helping you re-engage with the activity, reminding you of how you used to feel. But they still haven't brought back Boxelios, and the Mahjong parlor doesn't have a treasure chest to unlock. Cowards. Are you noticing how much fun I'm having? How excited I am to talk about Majima Gaiden, how much energy I'm getting out of the choices made in it? It's very emotionally bright. Right. What the hell do I mean by that? Originally, I was going to attribute it entirely to the pirate theme. After all, by adhering to it as strongly as they have, they were able to find a fresh take on delivering the Like a Dragon experience. I thought my affection for pirate stuff may be contributing to my overall enjoyment, but I think the premise of Majima Gaiden has allowed RGG Studio to revisit a warmth it left behind in Like a Dragon 7. GC, you're going to say. These games are full of sad stuff and melodrama. What do you mean? Majima Gaiden utilizes its components in ways that remind me of older Yakuza entries. And while playing it, I was thinking about Infinite Wealth, Lost Judgment, The Man Who Erased His Name, and realized how cynical they all felt. Infinite Wealth has this underlying bitterness in its positivity. It propagates this idea where being the more forgiving person in a situation automatically makes you a better person than whoever you're forgiving. Oh, all these people suck and they hate you for the wrong reasons, and you're so much better than them for surviving through it and staying the good, honest person you are. You're like Jesus Christ coming back to life. You see through all the nonsense, man. A far cry from Like a Dragon 7's tragic dynamic of a man trying to save the people he loves. Because even if they aren't great people, even if they've made mistakes, they are the only family he has, and he'd rather fight tirelessly to help them change than lose them altogether. Yeah, religious imagery is nice and all, but just because you're using it doesn't mean you're saying anything profound. The bitterness and cynicism in Infinite Wealth permeates its entire design. Half-baked play spots, an oversaturated map, a combat system adding admittedly cool ideas on top of a weak foundation which obviously needed improvement after its first outing. Like a Dragon has always been by the numbers, but it used to push and pull against the box it was stuck inside of to make weird shapes and have a laugh about it. It used to have a sense of humor, a silver lining, an uncompromising approach to new ideas, and a commitment to improving on original designs. Recent entries seem to consist of checklisting all the essentials, of reusing as many things as possible to avoid pushing new shapes into the box. They simply haven't been as interested in pushing the boundaries of the series or finding neat ways to reinvent themselves anymore. Majima Gaiden cares a lot about supplying reasons to enjoy old playspots, play around with new features made specifically for it, and has a story focused on hopeful outcomes and enjoying happiness as it comes, but also describes a relatable and poignant truth about life. Yeah, it still has checklisting, and this is a problem modern Like a Dragon suffers from at large, but it's hard to deny the energy brought to this entry. I know this is vague, but it's hard to see big ocean maps, an emphasis on treasure hunting, hectic ship battles, and feel underwhelmed the way I have with contemporary RGG Studio work. An observable experiment is occurring within Majima Gaiden. The formula is being adjusted in subtle ways. The people who worked on this wanted to flex creatively without leaving the experience too thin. Ship combat is a big trial run of this creative exploration, but there's plenty of smaller pokes and prods being made in Majima Gaiden for potential ideas to carry over into the future. There's an entire long battle dedicated to Majima's ability to jump during fights. It features jumping to avoid lasers, hit buttons, and ends with a giant boss sporting a weak spot on its upper back. True to the pirate theme and shaking up the typical long battle structure are these fencing duels Majima has up on ship masts or narrow structures. Although used sparingly, all of these tiny detours from the Like a Dragon norm help make Majima Gaiden stand out. They showcase the talent at RGG Studio and the range of their skill set. Even if you don't like any of the atypical qualities in Majima Gaiden, it's worth respecting for having such a focused approach to trying new things. Majima Gaiden feels less cut and paste than modern Like a Dragon. It's totally different to how I felt playing Infinite Wealth's undercooked Animal Crossing ripoff and its poorly structured Pokemon clone. There's too many feature complete additions in Majima Gaiden. They'll 100% return in some fashion in future titles. Too much work was put into them not to. Majima Gaiden has a firm grasp on scope, pacing, avoiding bloat, and I think it being a spin-off really helped make this possible. Less is more, and as we're going to learn, having less helps you appreciate how much you actually have. By the way, I've been getting a lot of questions about the Amazon Prime TV show. To be fair, I only watched the first 2 episodes because after that second episode, I said, there's no way in hell this is going to be anything that I will enjoy, so I stopped watching. Oh my God, sorry. It's bright and early at 2 p.m. on a Sunday, so I had to get my coffee going. So yeah, while I can't give you my fully comprehensive take on the Amazon Prime Like a Dragon TV show, there's a lot of things that stand out in those first 2 episodes that sort of set the tone for the rest of it. And from what I've been told by friends who have actually watched the whole thing, I'm not missing out on much. I guess we could start with the parts that I had the least issue with, but still had an issue with in a weird way. I'm not one of these people that cares when an adaptation isn't one-to-one or decides to do something, very different from the source material. I honestly think adapting stuff from one medium to another especially can be very difficult, and basically it's a case-by-case basis when it comes to adaptation in regards to how closely you follow the source material. It depends on who the original artist is, what the original work is, and who the person adapting it is, and for what reasons and why. And also to whatever medium it's going to. But I do think there's a certain line you don't cross when adapting things, and that line is sort of when whatever you're adapting loses its identity in your adaptation. A lot of the characters in this Like a Dragon show don't at all resemble who they're supposed to be. It's more about like the identity of these characters, who these characters are supposed to be, what their personalities are supposed to be like, the things about those characters that sort of attaches to them and make them compelling just really aren't present in the Amazon Prime TV show. And these weird characterizations also interfere with how they're adapting the story from the video game. There's like a heist that goes wrong because they were trying to rob an arcade, and then it turns out the arcade's owned by the Dojima family, and Kiryu, in order to save his family, decides to ask Dojima to let him become part of the family to pay him back. He suddenly goes off on this whole tangent about how he used to watch the Dragon of Dojima fight in the underground arenas and how he always wanted to be just like the Dragon of Dojima. And if you've ever played the games, if you've ever really just sat through one specific Yakuza game where Kiryu is just being himself, you would know that the moniker Dragon of Dojima isn't something he really cares about. The title is sort of just given to him as a result of his actions and his notoriety. It's not really something he walks around telling people that he is, nor is it really a title that he places a lot of importance on. Little character choices like that really kind of ruin it for me, because it's not that he's not the same character he is from the adaptations, it's more that if he doesn't have the same personality, if he doesn't have the same motivations, if he doesn't have the same backstory, if he doesn't have even the same personality, how is this adapting Kazuma Kiryu in any way besides putting his name and kind of likeness onto a completely different character? As I kept watching those first 2 episodes, it became very, very evident, very clear. The people who made this show were less interested in actually capturing anything about the original, essence of the first Yakuza game, and were more focused on just doing whatever they wanted with the license. That would have been fine if it was good, but it's not. Besides the poor characterizations, the thing that stood out to me the most in this show is just the terrible, terrible, terrible cinematography, terrible camera work in this show. There are some pretty ambitious shots where an entire scene is filmed in one complete take, which is pretty cool, but usually when you film a scene in one complete take, it's either very tense or like this very important moment that really matters, that really sinks in the importance of it with being one take. But these one take scenes are usually just people sitting around having a conversation or hanging around the house. And when they do these scenes, they shoot them in the most bizarre ways. The way it's shot just removes any void of meaning, and the actors, while I think they're very talented, whoever's directing, whoever's behind the camera is 100% just not taking advantage of the talent they have at their disposal. Kazuma is talking to a brand new character who didn't exist in the original version of Yakuza. That's another thing. This show has like a ton of new characters or sort of giving more life to characters that were always off camera. Again, kind of a neat idea, not inherently a bad idea, but ultimately just adds more confusion, more granular detail to something that honestly has never really needed it. Anyway, there's this shot where Kazuma is talking to this little girl character who's sort of like a fourth to Kiryu, Nishiki, and Yumi. I forget her name. I don't even remember what her name is. They sit on a bed and they start having a conversation, and you can see the actors off in the distance of this shot having like a really deep and meaningful conversation that would have been really good to see. However, the camera is positioned, it's in an entirely different room. The conversation is framed by a door frame, and I don't think that shot conveys any sort of meaning or adds anything to that scene. All it does is make it very difficult to see the body language of the actors, to watch them emote as they're performing this like very heartwarming or not heartwarming, but like a bit of a touching scene. And the actors have to be at least 20 feet away from the shot, like 20 feet away from the camera. Like it's kind of bizarre. It's a really weird choice. It really feels like whoever was doing the camera work in this, whoever was like deciding how things were going to be shot, really wanted to show off that they could get really cool looking shots, but they're wasted. They're wasted on the wrong scenes. In a vacuum, yes, certainly they are very cool looking shots. If you were to hit pause and screen cap that, it would look great as a banner for a article on the internet. I think they actively get in the way of the more important things happening in the show. When important things are happening, when the show isn't completely shattering its tone to have a montage to the sound of Mr. Blue Sky as the boys have been pressed into Yakuza service and the girls have been subjugated into hostess club work, which is very thinly veiled as a front for sex work stuff in the show. They've messed up big time. They are now indentured to one of the most important families in the criminal underworld. There's this big montage of them like having fun and playing dress up, and it just feels, it's like tonal whiplash because they're like laughing and smoking and wearing sunglasses and wearing nice suits and they're like, oh, we're so important. 15 minutes ago, you were shivering in your boots about the prospect of doing anything that was of the stuff that's going to happen to you. and then the show just kind of forgets that's a thing. Really bizarre. It was at that moment where I was like, oh, this is a farce. This is a farce. I looked up the IMDb pages of some of the people that worked on this, some of the producers, some of the directors, and there is nothing there that I recognized just eyeballing it. It's kind of indicative of like what exactly this TV show actually is, which is to say, maybe not the passion project that people were hoping for. Yakuza fans are very passionate. Yakuza fans care a lot about their franchise. As an aside, it's sort of baffling to me to see so many people kind of come to bat for this show, despite the fact that it's very clearly was not made with love in its heart, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's for as earnest and as big of a bunch of believers Yakuza fans can be. The people that make the media that are part of the Yakuza franchise so often are very cynical, very by the numbers, very like matter of fact about sales numbers and stuff like that. And I get it, you got to run a business, but like, man, the artistic integrity of this franchise is so dead in the water if we're not holding them to a higher standard. My God. Anyway, I'm a big writing guy. You know that. You know, I'm a big stickler for like the way things are written. Not in the terms of like, oh, this is a good story, this is a bad one. More of like being able to identify like, oh, okay, so they did this and then they did that and then that really didn't come together and so on and so forth. The story jumps between past and present pretty often. Usually you do that to tell a parallel story. You use that to sort of like discuss the rise and fall of a character, right? Like that's an example. That's an example of a really good way to use two different periods of time in your story as you flip back and forth between them, right? You tell the story of the character's fall at the same time that you're telling the story of their rise, and that sort of creates this very interesting dichotomy or whatever you want to call it. That's one way to do it. Another really good way to do it is like if you have two different time periods, you have two different characters, right? And they go through they have very similar trajectories, but they're from two different periods of time. And you follow both of them as their stories unfold and you jump back and forth and you tell it that way to sort of create a parallel between these two people as they go on to their lives. Stuff like that. The Amazon Prime TV show cuts between two periods of time between before Kiryu goes to prison and after Kiryu gets out of prison. And it doesn't really work. There's no parallel to draw there. They're doing the Yakuza 1 story, but then they're kind of like recreating a pseudo Yakuza 0 story. Like they're trying to tell a story before Yakuza 1 that's not Yakuza 0, in order to kind of create that idea of like, here's a thing that happened in his past, here's him setting it right in the future. They don't really succeed in that. Part of me thinks that maybe it was originally written linearly, like it was just going to be, here's everything up to him going to prison, and then like a second season would be the actual Yakuza 1 adaptation where it's like, here's all of the sort of the payoff to the setup. But there really isn't any of that in those first two episodes. It's just very confused. Everything in the past is really disorganized because again, none of it's actually adapting anything. The present day parts of the show are way more compelling, again, because that's the actual adaptation. Everything in the past is just kind of made up stuff. For instance, I'll give the show credit, giving Yumi more agency, giving her more sort of competency was great, especially because she is supposed to be a competent character, but we never really see that in the original story. When you do the adaptation, giving her more scenes where like you can see her actually doing things to sort of push her goals or survive is really nice to see. I genuinely enjoyed that. Whether or not they continue that with the episodes that come after, I don't know. You'd probably know better than me if you've watched more episodes, but I enjoyed that bit. That if everything else in that show had not been as bad as it was, I probably would have kept watching just to see where that went, because that's easily the most interesting part of the show. But if we're going to talk about the present day stuff, then we also have to talk about, again, Kiryu's characterization in the present day. When he gets out of prison, he's like the coolest guy ever. I don't know about you, but I don't think Kazuma Kiryu is cool because he tries to be cool, because he says cool things. I don't think that's why Kazuma Kiryu is cool. I think most people would agree with me, actually, where it's like he's just himself. Like he's just sort of like very quiet, very to himself. He's not like inactive. He's not a passive person, but he lets a lot of stuff roll off his back. He's not worried about that. He's not actually actively looking for fights with people. He's not really on a revenge quest in the original Yakuza. He's just not. He's like trying to discover what's going on. You know, his motives are not violent. His motives are not revenge. But a lot of the ways that they've characterized Kiryu in this adaptation really feels like they wanted to give him attitude. Like he's very standoffish. He's very, you know, it just doesn't really fit. Like he's like a violent guy. Like he's a fighting guy. Like he's like, I'm gonna fight everybody. And it's like, you can adapt it that way if you want, but like it's so far removed from the original work that it just doesn't, it's not really Like a Dragon anymore. It's not really the original Yakuza story anymore, is it? You're just doing something completely different and slapping the name onto it. That's more or less what you're doing. And also, like, I think the casting's not the best. I don't think any of the actors are terrible. I just think the guy that plays Kiryu is too scrawny. He's just not jacked enough. And granted, Kiryu's not yoked, but he fills out his suit a little better than this guy. And again, that's not a knock to that guy. He's doing the best he can with what he's being told to do. And I'm sure the costume department might have failed him in some aspects because he's not wearing a fitted suit, which bothers the hell out of me. It really bothers the hell out of me that everyone's wearing clothes in this that feel too big for them. It feels like little kids pretending to be adults sometimes. It really feels like a high school production of Like a Dragon. There's also like these really weird touches, like the Millennium Tower. Instead of just getting like a skyline of Tokyo or something, it doesn't even have to be Japan. It's a city. It's just gonna be a big city. You just need a metropolitan area. You get a drone shot of like a big tower, and that's all you need. Right? I mean, if you're making a show and there's like this big imposing tower in the middle of a city, then you just find there's plenty of cities like that. Somewhere in Tokyo has to look like that. We're not gonna know. It's an aerial shot. No one's gonna like trace the street lines and be like, that's not Kamurocho. You can do whatever you want. But instead of just getting like footage of that, instead of just doing that, instead of just, I don't know, how much is a drone nowadays? It probably can't even be that much. You just like, it couldn't have been more expensive than what they chose to do, which is CG a giant Kamen Rider build villain-esque tower into the center of a city area. It looks so bad. It looks terrible. It looks something out of like a Super Sentai show. And to be fair, I love Super Sentai, but you know, there's a certain level of budget and expectation and tone, right? When you watch a Super Sentai show or a Kamen Rider or a Tokusatsu, the stock asset Millennium Tower that looks like the final dungeon of a video game, that's not at all true to the setting. That is not at all true to what Like a Dragon is. Come on. I've seen smaller budgeted shows with worse production value know how to use a camera. I've seen better casting from those things. I've seen adaptations that have had less money adapt things better, or at least do something more interesting with its adaptation. This goes so far beyond the limitations of the creators. In fact, it's in my opinion, I think they did not take advantage of those limitations. They didn't really work with those within those limitations, and it shows. It really shows. And I think beyond all that, I just think this is a pile of garbage. It feels like somebody pitched a Like a Dragon TV show to RGG Studio or to Sega, got it greenlit, was given a certain amount of money, and then immediately found ways to avoid spending that money. And at the same time, you can tell that there are people that worked on this that actually gave a damn. They just weren't being used well. Oh, and the fight scenes are terrible. Like the few fight scenes that we have in those first 2 episodes are just bad, except for like the Yumi stuff. No shade to the actress that plays Yumi, but if you're overshadowing the guy playing Kazuma Kiryu, if your fight scene's more interesting than Kiryu's fight scene, I mean, come on. What are we doing? What are we doing? But yeah, just a terrible show, terrible adaptation. But beyond that, just even if it wasn't be adapting like original source work, just a terrible show. Very clearly someone wiped their ass with this production. It's all over it. It's all over it. It's hard not to see just the amount of corners cut and the amount of just not caring about the brand or the identity or the original source material in the slightest. If you want a good adaptation, if you want a really solid adaptation of the original Yakuza 1 story, you should watch the Like a Dragon movie directed by Takashi Miike. Or Takashi Mike, however you want to, I don't know how he pronounces it. I'm assuming it's Takashi Miike. That movie, incredible stuff. Not the best movie you've ever seen, but I would argue that some of the stuff in that movie gets used to characterize Yakuza characters in video games in future. I actually think that movie gave Nagoshi ideas on how to characterize Majima moving forward. Because the Majima in that movie is incredible. That movie understands the tone of Like a Dragon. That movie understands the balance between humor and seriousness. That movie just understands the source material so much better than this Amazon Prime TV show. Go watch the Takashi Miike Like a Dragon movie. You will not be disappointed. That is incredible stuff. I love that movie. I might go watch it later today just because I brought it up and I'm thinking about it now. I would even argue they end the story of Yakuza 1 on a better note. It almost kind of pokes fun at Yakuza 1's ending, which a lot of people sometimes consider to be a little bit more than it needed to be, if you know what I mean. Anyway, let's go back to the Majima Gaiden video. A good modern Like a Dragon title that I think is very good, very enjoyable. I hope you're enjoying the video, by the way. I put a lot of work into this one. I was trying to combine all the different styles of Questrospective videos that I've done on this series over the years into like one big sort of like fused together concept. I hope it convinces you that Majima Gaiden is something truly special, an outlier in the trajectory of this franchise and the studio that makes it. Anyway, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. Cut the tape.
おうじいさん、ちょっといいかなあ。これどこで見つけた？
起きそう？
このコイン他にもあるんちゃうかなあ。
Change is shapeless. Good.
それじゃ順を追って話そう。いいね。
Bad.
生きとるんやろな。
Navigators attach their own significance and meaning to the winds caught in their sails. They chart a course, man the helm, and steer the ship to the best of their abilities. Yet, confidence becomes pride, and pride becomes hubris, and hubris becomes their undoing. In protecting our pride as navigators, we stubbornly believe ourselves to be an unstoppable force. Change of one's own volition is well and good, but it isn't alone in shaping us. We cannot force the winds to change direction. We do not decide when and where a storm will overtake us. The more fiercely we try to harness the elements out of our control, the longer we outrun bad weather encroaching upon us, the more water we inevitably take on. The old adage holds true. The best way out of a storm is through it. We must accept that, even in our own lives, we are not divine, nor omnipotent, or omniscient, but we can recognize when winds change, spot storms on the horizon, and learn how our ship reacts to choppy waters. Then, we can adjust the sails and plot a new course.
With the Goromaru crew committed to finding treasure and Goro Majima conquering his immediate anxieties, You would think the worst was behind him, but a willingness for knowledge does not indicate a lesson learned. The Goromaru crew, now with Shigaki and Saejima in tow, have very few leads on the whereabouts of what they're looking for. The Esperanza is still shrouded in mystery, its location and contents largely unknown. As is the metaphorical panacea Majima is hoping to solve his problems with. Looking for answers, he meets with two enigmatic figures to learn more, and as you expect, these conversations hold deeper meaning for Majima than their face value would imply. First up is Spade Tucker, the wealthy New York investor commissioning Shigaki's group to search for the treasure on Nele Island. Tucker proves hard to find. After earning the trust of his subordinates, chasing him from Atlantis to a secluded location, and fighting through a secure facility, Majima satisfies Tucker's doubts.
ストップ。そこまでにしといてくれ。ギリギリまで近づかなくてもちゃんと話せる。はじめまして、キャプテンマジマとその友人たち。私はスペイド・タッカー。
Tucker explains he came into the possession of a small journal describing the treasure's location. He also elucidates the crew on why they need his cooperation.
内容を全部ここに記憶して物は燃やしてしまった。なんだって？そこも安全とは限らんで。記憶だって壊れるもんや。
Agreeing to an 80-20 split in Tucker's favor, he tells Majima to find the remnants of a hidden village on Nele Island, claiming it to be the first step in pinpointing where the treasure is. The Goromaru crew make their way back to Shigaki, who tells them they haven't found the village, and asking Rodriguez's men has only made him more suspicious. Noah then gives Majima a possible lead, an old man living in a house deep in the island's jungle, hidden from the rest of the world. Their attempts to wake the old man up fail, but in his hand is a classic piece of 8, Spanish silver, proof that the Esperanza is real.
もしかしてエスペランサの財宝だったりして
そらいくらなんでもできすぎっちゅうもんや。
だよね。
And just when they're about to make progress on their search, an unwelcome guest arrives.
何をしてる？いや、そっちこそ。なんで？俺の親父だ。知らないで来たのか。
Rodriguez questions them about how they found his father's home, and then notices the piece of 8 in Majima's hand.
そうか。それを見たのが裏ムソマジマ。なんで子供まで連れてきた？何？
With both their secrets spread out before them, there's no choice but to fight. If you already know how this story plays out, then I hope you're trying to piece the puzzle together before I get to explaining it. Whether or not you have, it's important to note both important figures introduced in this plot beat are old men. Majima is 60 years old, a ripe age to be gallivanting as a pirate and manifesting doppelgangers through sheer force of will. It's not hard to see what the Esperanza means to Majima in this context. If the treasure is a metaphor for his hope, and if it's true he can cure Noah of his incredibly mild illness with it, then to Majima, his hope is to restore his youth. But maybe this isn't what the treasure is. Maybe it's just what Majima thinks or hopes it is. Perhaps the Esperanza is something else entirely. Spade Tucker and Rodriguez's father are representations of a harsh truth both Majima and fans of this series need to accept. Our protagonist is old, and becoming old brings with it new challenges, but it means a lifetime of wisdom to tackle them with. Spade Tucker is a sharp-eyed, clever gentleman with years of experience, using it to outsmart the Goromaru crew into a less than favorable agreement. It's clear the old man is in control of the situation. Rodriguez's father is borderline catatonic, unable to take care of himself, unresponsive to others, and slowly withering away due to his diminishing health. One is full of ambitions, aware of his mortality and desperate for one last hurrah. The other is immobile, so mentally fragmented he's barely aware of his surroundings and haunted by a perpetual remorse. Together, they symbolize the joy and pain of aging. Tucker's control over Majima and Rodriguez's father's inability to help himself are parts of growing old Majima is afraid of. Letting his age control what he does and how he does it, and becoming so old he loses control over his faculties. However, Spade Tucker is also Majima's tempered mind. He is Majima's wit sharpened into a deadly weapon. Rodriguez's father might be losing himself, but in his hands is the Esperanza itself. No surprise then when Rodriguez makes his appearance. A staunch, secretive man who refuses to entertain anything out of the ordinary, Rodriguez serves the role of Majima's denial, his pride. Interestingly, it's Noah who brings up knowing about the old man. It's the core of who Majima is, leading him to a place where he confronts his denial. We understand Rodriguez keeping the existence of his father a secret as Majima avoiding acknowledging his age. This is echoed by Spade Tucker's secretive behavior and the lengths he goes to avoid speaking to Majima directly. Majima's fight with Rodriguez is about acceptance, but it's hard to let go of your pride. As the conflict escalates, Majima has to remind himself of how far he's already come. Shigaki helping Majima fight off Rodriguez, and then Saejima with the rest of the Goromaru crew showing up as reinforcements, is Majima breaking through that denial. It's wearing down his pride until it finally relents. Majima recruits Rodriguez, and noticing the 80-20 split he agreed to is getting crowded, reconvenes with the New York investor. Majima renegotiates their deal, forcing Tucker into a 20-80 split this time, explaining the Esperanza can now be found with or without him. This scene is about Majima making peace with his age and realizing the benefits of having lived as long as he has. But this renegotiation is pivotal. He's not allowing his age to be the guiding factor in his decisions. He's not letting it get in the way of his continued growth. Again, Majima is working through his hangups and getting closer to understanding what he wants. What Majima is looking for, the part of him he wants to change, the new perspective he wants to live his life with, becomes a little easier to see after accepting his age. In defeating Rodriguez, in swallowing his pride, he is one step closer to finding the Esperanza. After joining up, Rodriguez confesses he was working for Raymond Law, who is dead set on finding the treasure as well. This reveal sets the stage for our final act. In the process of searching for the Esperanza, for this thing capable of healing his ailing spirit, Majima's journey slowly becomes more than about finding a cure. He's learning what he needs isn't a solution so much as a new approach. It's an evolution to his soul searching. His needs and wants in this stage of his life aren't what he needed or wanted when he was younger. This is part of growing old. It's part of life. Majima is identifying where his unhappiness is coming from, and soon he'll be able to do something about it.
How did Noah find the old man? When did he have time to go exploring on his own? Wouldn't he have gotten his face eaten off by a leopard or something?
None of this matters, because it's not what the story is actually about. In other entries, it's easy to point at storytelling choices such as these to describe the narrative's shortcomings. But in those cases, choices made aren't in service to a concentrated narrative focused on delivering powerful allegories about a dilemma everyone is eventually going to experience. Yes, this is why I defend the rubber bullets plot point in Yakuza 4. Katsuragi is supposed to be an incompetent, failing upward cog in the machine who ends up under the thumb of a smarter, more sinister evil. His plan to frame Saejima sucks because it's supposed to suck, and he's supposed to get caught. At any rate, do you really want to spend an extra 20 minutes in a cutscene where Noah painstakingly describes the specific time he went exploring and listen to the writer needlessly fill in unimportant plot holes with an itinerary of the kid's off-camera trek? Because if you do, the Judgment series is right over there. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes less is more, and this has almost always been true for Like a Dragon. Majima Gaiden is a great example of a distilled, focused narrative in a series recently bogged down by boring minutia and tedium. It doesn't care about the literal logistics of a pirate-themed underworld or the statistical improbability of undiscovered treasure on an island a few miles off the coast of Honolulu, because it's fiction. Compare this to the hoops Infinite Wealth jumps through to explain how a tertiary character steals from department stores with a fake arm, or how this is actually totally ethical because Adachi is using it to convince people to hire his security consulting company. I cannot believe we spent time on this. This stripping down of the franchise identity into its essentials in Majima Gaiden includes iconic gameplay elements of Like a Dragon that I feel are horribly disfigured in recent entries. Namely, the quality of RGG Studios' level design. This is one of those situations as a fan of a longtime franchise when you're given something resembling an older iteration of the franchise and you like it enough for parts you don't like of the new iterations to more aggressively stick out. In the Infinite Wealth video, we talked about how constant gameplay interaction was in Honolulu City. There was always an item to pick up or a kiosk to interact with. But we also talked about its poorly filled spaces, how Honolulu felt a little too big for its own good. I assumed it was a problem with the city itself, pointing out how thin everything was spread across the city and the few novel interactions available poorly obscured a severe lack of substance. It sounds counterintuitive, but my appreciation of Honolulu as a setting greatly improves when there's less to be on the lookout for. I feel less boxed in Majima Gaiden. It's wild how cluttered and claustrophobic Honolulu feels in Infinite Wealth by comparison. Camera placement may play a part in it. Infinite Wealth centers its camera to the midsection or waistline of the player model, giving us this low ceiling sensation. The field of view is also much shorter, making objects in our peripheral vision feel like they're closing in on us. Majima Gaiden elevates the camera position and has a bigger default field of view. The slight downward tilt of the camera avoids the flat, straight from the back perspective Infinite Wealth has. It's slightly further away from the character model, and the added space allows us to see more of what's behind them, creating a better sense of being in an open area. Altogether, camera placement in Majima Gaiden does a better job with depth perception and prevents the 3D environments from feeling small. Replicating this in Infinite Wealth by tweaking the FOV slider doesn't quite work, so clearly there's more to it than a difference in adjustable settings. I also think the in-game HUD is much less intrusive in Majima Gaiden than in Infinite Wealth. Yeah, you can hide away your party stats in the turn-based entry to free up screen real estate, but even Majima Gaiden's minimap is anchored closer to the edge of the screen than Infinite Wealth's. Some of the icons and font sizes look smaller too. Your general vision is less obstructed. I'm not the most well-informed about these kinds of technical elements, so take everything I just said with a grain of salt. Looking at the differences between both maps puts into perspective how noisy Infinite Wealth's version of Honolulu is compared to Majima Gaiden's. There's so many things to stare at, and you're bombarded with so much information. It's overstimulating. Even after checklisting these icons and clearing out whatever you have to do there, some never go away because those activities are radiant and refresh periodically. So there's this perpetual dread of unfinished tasks while you're exploring, a nightmare for completionists, myself included. At Street View, this busy map reflects Infinite Wealth's Honolulu pretty well. Pick an item up, wave aloha to make new friends, do a Sujimon battle, find a treasure chest, run into a sub-story, do a regular turn-based battle, have a party talk, and this is a cycle that occurs within a couple of minutes over the course of a 100-hour plus RPG. This gets old, fast. Moreover, you never have time to appreciate the city itself. Your focus is pulled towards smaller objects of interest, so you don't take in the environment. Granted, it's not too dissimilar in Majima Gaiden, but there's more than a few tweaks changing Honolulu's overall feel. Sujimon battles don't exist in Majima Gaiden, and you don't notice how much space Sujimon spots are taking up until they're gone. Without them, the sidewalk is much wider than you remember. I'm uncertain if NPC population density is reduced in Majima Gaiden, but they have a lot more room to spread out now. Walking in pedestrian areas in Infinite Wealth was an exercise in frustration. Doing the same in Majima Gaiden feels normal. This isn't completely placebo effect either. On the topic of Hawaii being a much more spacious map for fights to take place in, Ryosuke Hori said this in the interview with Automaton.
Also, since Hawaii is so spacious, we tried to lean towards the type of action that takes advantage of the extra space. For example, some of Majima's combos are designed to make him travel a significant distance as he attacks. So even with simple controls like repeatedly pressing a button, you get to freely zoom across the field in all directions, which would not have been possible on the narrow streets of Japan. We've introduced many other such features that take advantage of the Hawaii map, so in a sense, I think we might have ended up making battles that feel even more exhilarating than the ones from previous games.
With the emphasis on spacious arenas for fighting, it's no stretch of the imagination for them to have added similar elbow room during exploration as well. Gaiden's Honolulu is just as full of items to pick up as Infinite Wealth's, but the context isn't the same. Infinite Wealth's crafting system requires all kinds of materials and supports, 8 party members with their own upgrade paths? Majima Gaiden simplifies the materials you need to craft upgrades and centers exclusively around Majima and his ship. And materials are easily acquired in multiple ways. You can definitely still pick up everything you see ad nauseum, but there isn't as strong of an obligation to. In turn, your gaze shifts to other parts of your surroundings. I never noticed how the restaurant signage in Infinite Wealth were excerpts from Around the World in 80 Days, or the insane effort someone made to model an entire coffee bean roaster inside this coffee shop. Maybe I shouldn't be noticing the garbage text on signs, but even though I could see more of the seams in Majima Gaiden, I could appreciate way more of the impressive details I was missing before. Physically navigating Majima Gaiden's Honolulu has a better quality of life too. I didn't mention street surfers in the Infinite Wealth video because I barely used them. They actively impede play. You can cross huge distances in a short amount of time, but you can't pick any items up or interact with people while you're riding one. And if there's something new to interact with every 5 steps, then there's no point getting on it. This is changed in Majima Gaiden. You can interact with objects and people while you're riding the Street Surfer. And I might be wrong, but I think they're faster as well. I gotta tell you, riding the Street Surfer is wonderful. A good amount of my time in Majima Gaiden was slapping a waypoint marker on my map and letting it auto-drive me to my destination. Wouldn't you know it, while it was doing this for me, I was able to look around for secrets or a photo op for my Aloe Happy tour or whatever. And because I was looking around, I was taking in the sights and becoming familiar with my environment. Part of classic Yakuza level design is integrating the player into the city of Kamurocho. Longtime fans can probably find a specific street in this town if you gave us the name. Even people who are playing Yakuza for the first time end up knowing where everything is in Kamurocho pretty quickly. This is thanks to downtime. Between one activity and the next, players don't have much else to do but look around and appreciate the environments they're walking through. This passive exploration, as I call it, is important. It is the video game medium's version of establishing shots. Little by little, the player ingrains themselves in the world you've constructed, and their imaginations feed into the active exploration features of the world. Is it just me? Does anybody else imagine conversations between the player character and an NPC during a speechless interaction, like buying stuff from a shop or playing a minigame? Am I the only one that does that? Is that weird? That might be weird. Whatever. The grappling hook in Majima Gaiden is mainly used to catch fish or bugs, but it also allows access to new areas and treasure chests hidden away in secret places. We haven't seen this series play with the vertical axis of its environments since Yakuza 6 maybe? Kiwami 2? Even then, the extent to which it does in those entries is adding a couple floors to one building in Sotenbori and a few more in Kamurocho. Yokohama and Hiroshima are both pretty flat locations. I don't really remember anything beyond the second floor of a restaurant district. Honolulu is even flatter. Until Majima Gaiden, where the grappling hook places emphasis on rooftops and hard to see areas. Not a big deal, but it encourages us to examine our surroundings and scrutinize our immediate area. Treasure chests in grappling hook locations, item shops, and play spots further slow us down and give us an excuse to take our time within the setting. If these places are interiors, then we spend longer inside them. maybe have a reason to come back if we can't get the treasure chest right away, and breed familiarity with these spaces. The function of unique exploration details in Majima Gaiden compared to its direct predecessor in an identical sandbox reminds me of how badly RGG Studio wanted you to fall in love with their cities. While it's cool to imagine previous titles as these big, bombastic releases pushing the envelope of what's possible under the extreme limitations the studio has historically had, the reason they feel this way is because they were doing a lot with a little. There is less to do in Majima Gaiden than there is in Infinite Wealth, and as a result, what you have in Majima Gaiden is able to work in greater harmony. As you peel away the tedium, as you stop trying to hide the openness of your environment and instead look for ways to accentuate it, mechanics or activities players were brushing off are now compelling to engage with. Exploration is more about drawing emphasis to the greater area than it is about staring down at your feet to hoard useless junk in your inventory. Despite transitioning to turn-based RPG and the work they've done to build the world with more RPG exploration in mind, RGG Studio has struggled to make it work. And I think it's because they feel the need to saturate the world with a bunch of meaningless items as opposed to just keeping it the way it always was. They want to make their map feel like one you'd expect from an RPG, but Like a Dragon has always been an RPG. This already was, and has always been, an RPG world. Majima Gaiden's more sensible explorative elements highlight how much RGG Studio has overcompensated for the turn-based shift. Playspots in Majima Gaiden follow this same line of thinking. RGG Studio did away with half of Infinite Wealth's new playspots to focus on improving the other half in Majima Gaiden. Sujimon is gone, the dating minigame is gone, Dondoko Poopy Island is gone. The really uninspired, procedurally generated dungeons with those annoying doors you were locked into an animation to open are gone. Following Like a Dragon tradition, Majima Gaiden features a few familiar playspots with new iterations. The energy we discussed earlier has really helped bring these playspots to parity. Sicko Snap has been moved to a single access point instead of its levels being scattered across the city. Sickos are doing more creative gags, and characters from the story show up in silly ways to throw you off. There's a storyline you can follow and even a final boss fight for it. Crazy Delivery has a new map to play on, Dragon Kart returns with a new set of fun tracks to race in, an upgrade system for all the karts you can unlock, and a brand new battle mode. These major playspots might be familiar, but they all feel more fleshed out, more robust than their previous versions. Admittedly, it's not a lot. Dragon Kart's battle mode is rough around the edges, even if the new tracks are pretty good. Crazy Delivery getting one new map isn't exciting enough to make an essay about it. And Sicko Snap's relative newness feels like what it should have been in the first place. But I couldn't escape the memory of playing Infinite Wealth and wrestling with how I usually felt about Like a Dragon's first foray into a new playspot or mode versus what we've recently been given. We've built this sort of understanding with RGG Studio. We know any new feature they put out isn't going to be the most in-depth or polished. This is an open secret we all acknowledge and at times celebrate, but it often goes unspoken. As a Like a Dragon fan, you're expected to play a new mechanic or minigame with the expectation it's going to be expanded, deepened, and polished in the next entry. You can compare work done on Kamurocho from Yakuza 3 to Yakuza 4. You can stare at Kiryu's facelifts across the PS3 generation of titles. You can take note of how the Hostess Club playspot changes over the years, laying the groundwork for the Cabaret Sar minigame in Yakuza 0. The grand appeal of this series, to me, has always been its iterative work on the ideas it introduces. I like watching things evolve. I appreciate a studio so squeezed by tight deadlines and absurd expectations, yet unafraid to experiment with a new minigame or even a total shift in genre. But I haven't been impressed with its recent output in this regard. The defining quality of these experimental additions or changes is their sense of completeness. Yakuza 6 was packed to the brim with all sorts of playspot activities and side content, but none of it felt hollow. Definitely a tech demo, so RGG Studio could beg someone to let them make something besides Like a Dragon, but all fairly well made. There was decent progression and solid gameplay elements from each one. By comparison, Infinite Wealth's new ideas feel so half-assed. The wide range of underdeveloped ideas in Infinite Wealth severely impact the potential they have to be something memorable. In contrast, Majima Gaiden reminds me how good some of those ideas are on paper, and how much better their implementation would be had RGG Studio not shoved as much of them as possible into their previous release. Had there been a focus on a handful of these ideas. It's evident simply by examining how playspots like Sicko Snap feel in Majima Gaiden compared to in Infinite Wealth. Not because RGG Studio is doing what it usually does with these playspots, but because they finally brought these playspots up to the already low standards we tend to hold them to. But if you need more evidence, check out this batting minigame made specifically for Majima Gaiden. You have to break the lock on the giant treasure chest, but to do so, you need to smash these crates to reveal it. You have a limited amount of tries to do it, and you have to aim your shot carefully while paying attention to the kind of pitch you're being given. It's using the legacy playspot as a base, but it's a puzzle game, and most importantly, despite its simplicity, feels like a complete idea rather than a cheap gag to lampshade for 10 hours. You can further reinforce this argument for Majima Gaiden applying classic RGG Studio design principles effectively by pointing out how it reimagines a long-standing core feature of its action RPGs, rarely, if ever, iterated on. The equipment system in Majima Gaiden is a fresh take on a static feature. Majima can wear 10 different rings on his fingers, but many rings have unique abilities or may function as a set. Because they operate in sets and only go on certain fingers, you can't just slap on the best of everything and call it a day. Some rings are intended to be paired with specific fighting styles too. In a series where equipment items are basically optional, except for the Amon fight in Yakuza 4, we love you Bulletproof Vest, it's awesome to be playing a Like a Dragon title where equipment isn't an afterthought, or the same set of items we find in every single action RPG entry since the first Yakuza. Rings feel special, specifically stylized to Majima as opposed to being the generic equipment system we usually get, elevating a common feature into a unique component of Majima Gaiden. Can you imagine someone like Kiryu or Yagami having an equipment system centered around rings? Of course you can't. If you take this as is and plop it onto a different character in a different entry, it would feel very tacked on or ill-fitting. It's tied to the specific person we are playing as and provides more cohesion to the overall experience. This would not be possible had the people working on Majima Gaiden not adhered so strongly to core design principles this series has historically championed. And it makes me equally excited and concerned for the future. Majima Gaiden is a spin-off. It's supposed to be a sidestep, a lightweight digression from the rest of the Like a Dragon series, a short, scenic detour eventually bringing us back to the main road we're driving down. So much of Majima Gaiden feels like a last hurrah of everything we recognized Like a Dragon to be. Not in terms of the characters we're following or the genre it utilizes, but in terms of the focus and design sensibilities the series has always employed. On one hand, maybe RGG Studio will notice how much more effective their work on this project was and try to replicate it in the next entry. On the other hand, statements made by folks in charge give the impression they don't see Majima Gaiden as a meaningful entry. I'm not saying they didn't want it to be good, but, you know, other more important stuff is on their plate right now. And while I would love for Majima Gaiden to be a sign of the series successfully reassessing what makes it so palpable, its concluding tone is akin to laying a loved one to rest. In less flowery words, it feels like, given how long they had to work on this and how they've been talking about it, relying on their traditional methods might be a matter of cost effectiveness as opposed to conscious creativity. It's almost like they don't want to use defining aspects of Like a Dragon in the future. Check out this quote from Yokoyama in that PlayStation blog interview with regard to how he feels about the series and its spin-offs.
Also, spin-offs are perfect in size for adults. The Like a Dragon series is like an all-you-can-eat restaurant, where you can choose from meat, seafood, and anything else you want and eat however much you like. But as you mature, you start to appreciate well-balanced, good portion. What the fuck is this quote? But as you mature, you start to appreciate well-balanced, good proportioned meals. Spin-offs are like that.
Seriously, judging these quotes wasn't part of the original plan, but why wouldn't you want your main series to be well-balanced and well-proportioned? Why are you comparing your flagship series to a cheap buffet? Regardless, this highlights the top-level perspective at RGG Studio about RGG. It's no longer dedicated to authenticity and consistency in spite of stringent limitations. RGG Studio is not interested in offering you a balanced experience. It wants you to shovel food onto your plate and stuff yourself. And a nice meal, a dish served with care and thought put into it, it's not as important. It's not their main concern. People are gonna shove whatever they get into their face anyway, so why bother? Maybe that's harsh, but that's how it feels. That's what this sounds like. That's what it looks like. These confusing statements made by the people in charge cement the sentiment I expressed in my video on the man who erased his name. I really do think they're discarding what made this series successful to convert it into a content farm. It's ironic Majima Gaiden's story is attached to a project signaling the last time we'll ever see a semblance of Golden Age Yakuza. It's definitely a story about accepting change and growing as a person late in life, but it stresses this growth is built upon who you used to be. Your past experiences and lessons learned are fundamental to future improvement. I hope RGG Studio understands its new direction is another chapter in an ongoing saga, not the beginning of an entirely new book. Change isn't for flushing out the entirety of who you used to be. It's to better understand the value of who you are. So, if YouTube has been doing what it's supposed to be doing, you might have noticed me posting progress updates on the production of the video you're watching right now. Somebody asked me a really good question on one of those community posts. They wanted to know how I felt about a specific thing in Majima Gaiden. I looked through my script to see if I talked about it and then asked them to explain a little bit further and realized that they were asking me about something I kind of knew was a problem in Modern Like a Dragon, but I just hadn't really connected the dots on it enough to realize that it was something worth talking about. And after thinking about how it's used in Majima Gaiden, I've realized that there is something worthwhile to discuss here because it's not as cut and dry as most of Modern Like a Dragon's, let's say, less than kind depictions of people. But it also ties pretty neatly into some of the issues Majima Gaiden has, which, don't worry, the next section is going to have plenty of that. And if I'm being honest, it's left a bad taste in my mouth that I've been using a recurring gag to poke fun at how absurdly this specific thing is written without really explaining why it's absurd. And honestly, the recurring gag sort of underplays and misses the point of why this is a problem. I do think the gag is funny, but paired with the way I talk about it in the next section, honestly, I think it comes across a little ableist. And yeah, I could just take it out of the video and act like I was never going to say that in the first place, but I'd rather leave it in so people realize how easy it is to miss this sort of stuff. This is why it's super important to get other perspectives on the art you like. Had that person not left that comment on my progress update, I would have never realized that, yeah, that is a problem, and yeah, that's no good. So let me stop talking around it and just get right into it. Noah Rich has asthma. The way Noah's asthma is characterized in Majima Gaiden is terribly hyperbolized, but also at the same time completely dismissive of people who suffer from asthma. Noah's asthma is both one of the most awful things that could have ever happened to him, needs to be cured, and also isn't that big of a deal. A very, very core, crucial part of Majima Gaiden's story is that Majima is going off to cure Noah of his asthma. Now, it's very easy to view that as the writer saying that people with disabilities can be cured, or people with disabilities need to be cured, etc., etc. And this does, in fact, line up with recent depictions of disabled people in recent Like a Dragon games. Infinite Wealth has a guy who's literally faking the fact that he's in a wheelchair. Like a Dragon 7 has a guy who, through medical procedures and hard work, is able to walk on his own two legs again. There seems to be a consistent through line with recent Like a Dragon games whenever a disabled person is in the story, where that disabled person either can be fixed or wants to be fixed, or is completely lying about the fact that they are disabled. This depiction of disabled people happens to mesh pretty well with another aspect of Furuta's writing that we'll get into in the next section. As someone with a solid amount of creative and fiction writing experience, I can sort of understand how a writer would end up in the situation that Majima Gaiden's story found itself in. You want to create this character who represents this inner core of who your protagonist is, and your protagonist now has to sort of save that character in order to sort of save himself, metaphorically speaking, of course. So as a writer, you think, well, this character needs to have some sort of problem to be fixed. And unfortunately for Tsuyoshi Furuta, giving that character asthma is both not a great way to depict someone with a disability, but also not a very compelling surface level detriment, we'll say, that would convince me that we need to go find a disease curing elixir for it. I'm not gonna say some people don't have like really bad debilitating asthma, but at the same time that it wants to make Noah's asthma this really, really big deal, it also treats it as a non-issue. Very rarely in the story does Noah actually have an asthma attack that is dangerous or creates an issue that needs to be resolved. You get a couple of cutscenes where the kid starts coughing, uses his inhaler, and it's over. No one steals the inhaler from the kid. No one tries to force the kid not to use the inhaler. No one really does anything. Nothing really happens to Noah in regards to his asthma to even really make his asthma an integral part of the story in the way that Majima Gaiden really sets up early on. And at the same time that Noah's dad is portrayed as sort of this overly protective, sort of coddling father figure that isn't letting Noah be a kid and experience the world around him, it also tries to paint him as this sympathetic figure who wants to protect his kid and is just really scared of something happening to him. And so we shouldn't be too harsh on him because he's just doing what's right for the kid. Don't get me wrong, it's very effective as a storytelling tool in regards to what we've discussed this entire video. And personally, I think it's one of the more tame examples of the depiction of disabled people in the Yakuza series. But it is yet another step in an ongoing pattern with the Like a Dragon series in respect to disabled people. This idea that you have to cure someone's asthma or else they can't live the life they want to lead is sort of bogus. I'll give it some points in that ultimately the story says you don't need to cure Noah of his asthma and that it's not really something that needs to be fixed. But the conclusion of Noah not needing to be cured is the punctuation to a very long run-on sentence that started at the beginning of Majima Gaiden that completely tries to underplay the disability Noah has into basically being something the kid will just kind of get over. There's also that low-key realization you're probably having right now where if Jason actually cared about Noah's asthma that much, he would have stayed in Hawaii and maybe ensured that the kid could go seek medical attention. Unless the writer had some kind of axe to grind with the medical sciences. Now, I don't have asthma, and admittedly, when I hear somebody has asthma, I don't really register it as like a serious problem. If you can internalize ableism, that's definitely part of mine. But it's important to note that instead of portraying Noah with a severe case of asthma, they've given him a very mild version of it. You can just tell judging by the number of asthma attacks the kid has, how long they last, when they happen, and how impactful they actually are to the events of the story, which is to say not very. And using that information, you can kind of surmise how the people who wrote that character with that disability view that disability. Which is to say, they don't think it's that big of an issue. And I think, yeah, sure, if somebody had a very mild case of asthma, I'm sure they can pretty much do everything anybody else can, or, you know, they don't really need that much more assistance to do things. But obviously, when people with asthma are unable to do certain things, or need a little bit of extra help to do those things, or need to carry around an inhaler just in case, obviously those cases of asthma are not the little coughing fits that this character you've written is having. I don't think I'm being very articulate here, and yeah, this is way out of my wheelhouse, but it really is something that is present in this story, is present in other Like a Dragon stories, and I would love to see more people talk about this, because surprisingly, this series does have quite a few notable people with disabilities in them. If you're someone who covers this sort of thing in video games, I would love to see a video on Like a Dragon about it. If you thought this intermission was confusing, don't worry, I'm also very confused. Calling it a complicated depiction would imply that there's some good in it, but it's more like it's complicated in the way that it's bad. A lot of wires crossed, a lot of misunderstandings of what people mean when they talk about a specific disability, and honestly very par for the course whenever Like a Dragon decides to have social commentary, which is all the time. I hope I got across what I wanted to say, and I'm very sorry if I completely butchered that whole conversation. Anyway, I've talked your ear off for long enough. Let's get back to the rest of the actual video. I think the last section of this video is the best part, so enjoy. Villains in our personal stories are often born from our own image. They remind us of our detrimental qualities. It's why hating villains is so easy. We're familiar with what we don't like about them, and despite not knowing them well, can greatly articulate why. But the true villain in every story is the inner demon, the part of us resonating with external evils we can identify, tricking us right at the very end to reconsider everything. It's the enabler, the devil's advocate, the last bastion of the worst parts of who we are. The voice in the back of your head isn't always your intuition. Sometimes it's complacency, ego. We can become so comfortable in our miseries. We make excuses for why we can't be different or why we have to be this way. We believe the misery will eventually bottom out if we commit to who we are hard enough. Our greatest opponent is ourselves, and at times it becomes necessary to push back.
ちらも容赦しない。アホか。
そんなん俺がして約束じゃ。
We have to fight the person in the mirror, else we become unable to see ourselves in the reflection.
そこの海賊もどきの商売人にきっちり思い知らせてやらんとな。
Raymond Law has caught wind of Majima's alliance, and he doesn't plan on being left out. Holding Spade Tucker hostage, demanding half of the treasure's value, and threatening to destroy the Goromaru all at once. He forces Majima to play nice. Majima regains custody of Tucker, and with everyone unified, the crew sources the would-be resting place of the Esperanza, but not before an old friend returns to settle the score. The Goromaru manages to weaken it, but the Kraken is relentless. Majima is pulled into the water by the colossal creature, manages to free himself, and there, locking eyes with the abyss, is taken back to before any of this ever started.
ハワイまで来て巨大化に食われるんけ。なかなか派手な死に方や。おもろいやないかい。
He kills the squid, they sail into the cove, and finally, they find the Esperanza.
ストップ。手離すで。そしたらゆっくり目開けてみ。
すごい。何これ。すごいよ、船長。
There's plenty of congratulations to hand out, but when they notice there isn't anything like a healing elixir in the horde, Jason brings up an important point.
ノアに飲ませてやりたかったがな、竜の心臓。俺は7年前、そのために駆け回ってた。
Noah reassures his father, letting him know it doesn't matter if there is a magical potion to cure his incredibly mild illness.
俺は大丈夫。だからもし本当に竜の心臓があったとしてもさ、俺なんかよりもっと大変な人に使った方がいいよ。
And then the credits roll, right? Treasure's found, so story's over? No, because this story is not really about finding literal treasure, and pirate stories about treasure rarely are. Not too long after Majima finds the Esperanza, the rulers of these oceans begin their offensive. Eager to rip the treasure out of the Goro pirates' hands, Queen Michelle arrives with her entire navy ready to sink Majima and his friends beneath the brine. At the same time, Raymond Law plans to ensure Majima's cooperation by kidnapping Jason's daughter, Moana, intending to ransom her for the treasure. The Goromaru alliance is shaken. The potential for failure rears its ugly head, and Shigaki's faction turns on the rest of them. Another fight breaks out, but so close to the prize, the consequences are much more dire. Shigaki immediately knows he's gone too far. As Majima comforts Noah in his time of need, Saejima escorts Jason back to Hawaii, leaving the rest of the group to focus on Queen Michelle's assault. It should be obvious what Raymond Law represents to Majima and why his presence in Majima Gaiden is largely invisible until its very end. Superficially, Raymond Law lacks Majima's moral compass. He is exactly the sort of conniving, manipulative force Majima has constantly been at odds with in this series. On a deeper level, Raymond Law goes into action as Majima approaches actualization in order to remain relevant. He's a reflection of Majima's worst qualities, at least what Majima considers his worst qualities. Maybe it's more accurate to call him the last holdout of Majima's old way of thinking. Raymond Law is the inner demon Majima has failed to identify and defeat for many years. On the precipice of redefining himself, Majima is forced to acknowledge he is the source of his own grief. His adherence to a creed he swore on decades ago no longer makes him happy. Raymond Law becomes a bigger player in this story the more Majima is able to separate the core values of who he is from the parts of him getting in the way of being true to them. He can't keep living like this. In fact, he might not have been planning to live much longer.
船長、気がついた？
いや、伊賀は俺の勝ちやな。
やったよ船長。でも早く起き上がった方がいいね。
It stinks we didn't get an underwater fight with the Kraken, but don't let the lack of a satisfying cutscene or gameplay segment distract you from Majima's change in perspective. In their first encounter, Majima has a death wish. But after meeting Noah and going on this quest for treasure, his second brush with death is met with staunch defiance. And this one's a little bit of a stretch, but Majima confronting this force of nature is, in a way, the moment he stops dreading his own mortality. This coincides with Majima regaining his memories. His adventure comes full circle, and he's able to exercise his new lease on life against what nearly killed him in the first place. When they discover the treasure and learn there's no panacea or life-giving elixir, the entire crew is more or less at peace with it. The real treasure was the friends we made along the— I'm just kidding. Finding the Esperanza is Majima finally learning what he wants to spend the next stage of his life doing. Majima has accepted he's old, he's made peace with his past, and now he sees himself as a positive force on someone else's life. He assumes a new responsibility for the people who will inherit the world he leaves behind.
お前の憧れてた世界がそんなつまらんもんなわけあるかい。
In Yakuza 0, Goro Majima was changed by the individuals who left their mark on him. In Majima Gaiden, he's become one of those people to someone else. When Raymond Law springs his trap, Shigaki, Majima's aspect of failure, is the one who turns on the group. As he goes to attack the inner self Majima is trying to preserve, it's Jason who ends up worse for wear. Growing as a person is never a clean or painless transaction. Painful truths are hard to swallow, right? Ego death is certainly a thing. So of course, Majima's fear of failure makes him more weary, more exhausted at the final push he needs to make. As the Goromaru crew falls deeper into Raymond Law's trap, Majima must persevere through a torturous epiphany. He has to relive some of what he's been through.
残りのやつもえぐっといてやろう。
But a lifetime of experience, a sense of duty to his loved ones, and the willfulness at the heart of who he is help him overcome. Beaten and bruised, but alive, Goro Majima emerges from his metamorphosis a changed man.
やれるんか。当たり前やんか。この時をご褒美を思ってずっと待っとった。
His pirate adventure has given him a new outlook on life, and with his memories restored, he's able to incorporate it into his identity.
それからこれも忘れもんや。船長。
Solidified by this gorgeous shot of the Hanya tattoo and the demon fire dagger, flanked by the pirate cutlasses, the eye patch, and the tricorn hat in frame. The tattoo back shot. This iconic shot is used in plenty of Like a Dragon titles, usually at the end of their stories, but I don't think it's ever been used as effectively before. Rather than visually cementing the convictions our protagonist has unwaveringly held on to throughout the story, it is instead an indicator of the growth our character has had across it. This is visual storytelling. It is telling you outright, Goro Majima has redefined himself to be more than what he used to be, more than what he is recognized as.
Majima Goro, やってくれたな。
Majima's final fight with Raymond Law is classic Like a Dragon fare. It's not about who's physically stronger so much as who has the stronger convictions. In Majima Gaiden's case, this final confrontation is Goro Majima using his newfound identity to put a rest to his inner turmoil. He's using what he's learned to answer the question, who is Goro Majima?
お前だって周りを出し抜こうとこそこそやってたろ。ジェイソンもそう。みんな50歩100歩のワルだ。最後に勝ったのが俺ってだけでな。
そこや。
ああ？
自分の汗もかかんと周り操ってぶっ消させて汚い真似したやつが最後に笑う。俺はそんなくだらんもんをノアに見せたくないんよ。
What you're witnessing here is Goro Majima putting an end to his delusions of ambition. It's an admission of the selfishness he's harbored while trying to maintain his way of life.
自分だけいい格好してるつもりか。同類だろうが。
あの子が俺な。俺は死んどった。そんなんが目キラキラさせて。 俺に広い世界がどんなにええもんか期待してくるんやで。そこに少しでも近づけてやるんが大人の責任っちゅうもん。
Goro Majima is done living for himself. Now he's going to make sure the next generation can live as freely as he did.
身の程知らずのゴミですが。
身の程なんぞ知らんわ。 そんなもんに縛られて子供に夢語れるかボケ。
And of course he mops the floor with Raymond Law, a man characterized by his selfishness and only focused on himself. When shown mercy and given a consolation for his efforts, Raymond Law has two options: accept his time is over, or continue hunting the white whale neither he nor Majima will ever win against. He chooses poorly. Majima returns to the crew, now looking over the treasure hoard in the Madlantis throne room. They reflect on the tribulations they faced to get here, and the crew offers Majima first pick of the treasure. The screen fades to black, and we come back to a picture of the Goromaru crew, a symbol of Majima's newfound strength, the complete picture of who he is.
財宝っちゅうのは追いかけるうちが花やからの。手に入れた後に残んのは退屈だけや。せやからそうなる前の一瞬を切り取って手に入れたんや。俺はそれで満足やっちゅうての。
And now, Tsuyoshi Furuta can't contain himself any longer.
不老不死はさすがにファンタジーすぎるけど、100歳200歳くらいまで長生きしたりして。
長生きといやパレカナの前の競争。
おお、ブライス。 あいつも100歳超えてんのに化け物じみた若さだったらしいよ。
親父は自分がエスペランサを埋めた海賊だった気がするってよ。もしくはやはりタッカーの式を書いたのも親父で、実は200歳を超えてるのか。
Alright, Furuta. F***ing wrap it up, okay? F***ing wrap it up, I get it. It's all about eternal life. I get it. Your little stupid supernatural bullshit. Whatever.
いやまさか。
Yeah, I get it. Oh, it could've. Oh, you gotta have faith in something beyond just what exists. I get. Yeah, okay. Okay. Shut the fuck up. Okay, you told a good story. Don't fucking ruin it now. If you thought for a second that I wouldn't have anything negative to say about Majima Gaiden, then you haven't been here long enough. Here I was thinking Furuta had moved on from his weird crusade against modern medicine and trying to inject supernatural elements into every single one of his works. He goes the entire story without explaining plot holes which rightfully didn't need explaining, only for him to explain not just the ones in Majima Gaiden, but also trying to retroactively explain how Bryce in Infinite Wealth was so capable despite his age. It couldn't have just been a weird, quirky thing about the series. I mean, we've already got 50-year-old men doing front flips and fighting wild animals, but no. You see, the old man licks a rock and it makes him immortal. There is a stark difference between an improbable scenario and outright fantasy. And the line where one crosses over to the other is when you explain the improbable scenario with magic and pseudoscience. Also, look, another character in a Furuta ridden like a dragon with dementia. Stop doing this! Stop it! Stop putting people with dementia in your story! It made sense in Judgment, but now you're just shoehorning it into everything. I'm done providing constructive reasoning for this. I would be retreading old ground at this point. I have nothing left but to complain about it like a person whose dog refuses to stop peeing on the rug. It drives me up a freaking wall. Majima Gaiden reminds me of the golden age of Like a Dragon, but it's still full of the ongoing issues I take with the series at large. Even in this tightly woven, beautifully shot work, there are many times when the exposition gets away from the writer and we are subjected to way too much talking. The first time it happens is when Ryuji Akiyama spends an obscene amount of time explaining Jason Rich's backstory and is reading a script desperately trying to make asthma an illness on the level of cancer. Again, I don't know what Furuta's obsession is with medical science, but he's always talking about it in his work, and it always borders on pseudoscience conspiracy. Which was fun in Dead Souls because it's a zombie shooter and a ripoff of Resident Evil, where nothing really makes sense anyway. Speaking of Ryuji Akiyama, I don't know why he's here. Every scene with Masaru feels tacked on to include the performer in the story. Right before the ship battle against Raymond Law's right-hand man and Jason's former treasure hunting partner, there's a sudden detour the story makes to paint Masaru as a potential traitor. But it's immediately resolved, nothing really comes out of it, and feels like it was written in so that Ryuji Akiyama could do some dramatic acting. I'm not one of those every character needs a function people, but he doesn't even give us good flavor. They tried to use his comedy skills, but he isn't given anything to work with. As much as I like Majima Gaiden for condensing play spots and focusing on refining existing ideas or smaller scaled new ones, this live action dating show is terrible. Just watching one or two scenes makes it abundantly clear none of the actors were directed or given a script to work with. They just threw some props at Ryuji Akiyama and started recording whatever he said and did. It is so awkward. Not because it's trying to be intentionally awkward, though it is trying to be. It's not funny awkward, it's just awkward. People are barely in character. Ryuji Akiyama looks like he's staring at the film crew for help sometimes. I'm sure he's capable of being funny, but he has this constant deer in the headlights look on his face. The whole segment reeks of someone desperately trying to get a laugh out of a silent room with zero material. The women in this look uncomfortable and unsure of what they should be doing. Can you imagine being an actress, getting told you were going to do a comedy bit with a famous comedian and then given nothing to work with? As this dude gets really uncomfortably close to you and no-sells some of the worst physical comedy you've ever seen? I would think this guy orchestrated the whole thing so he could stare at my tatas. And on the treatment of women, Majima Gaiden is nothing new. If you've already played it, here's a pop quiz. What's Noah's mom's name? And before you go look it up, yes, you do meet her and she does have one. I can't remember it right now, so any name you submit in the comments will be counted as a correct answer and you will be given a passing grade. The presence of women in this story is largely as emotional ammunition for the men in it. One small exception being Naomi. She has personal agency and her own motives for her actions, at least. But Moana, Noah's mom, and importantly Queen Michelle all end up swept into the background until the story decides it needs to put a woman in danger or make her antagonize the main cast. I think RGG Studio owes Romy Park a decent role and bonus pay for wasting her time. She plays Queen Michelle in Majima Gaiden, and she's 2 for 2 on playing a woman in a leadership position who ends up getting suddenly killed. Even in a story with as many goofy cartoon characters as Majima Gaiden has, Queen Michelle's aristocratic buffoonery preceding her demise is so extra.
世界中の裏社会を牛耳る老人たちはみんな私を娘のように愛してる。彼らは若造の勝手で序列が乱されることを許さない。
Her and Raymond Law are very similar, but her position in power is always framed as a joke. Her death seems to be her comeuppance for finally participating in the narrative. You could make the connection to the other character Romy Park has played in this series and argue Queen Michelle's death was a low-key way of showing how Majima's previous life as a Yakuza kind of destroyed his relationships and chances at finding any semblance of romance or love. It's an incredibly weak argument though, not strongly supported by the narrative if true, and frankly, I'm tired of this series fridging women for the sake of some dude's emotional baggage. Like a Dragon's general treatment of most of its women characters has been, still is, and will probably continue to be booty butt cheeks. Oh yeah, don't worry, my teeth are just as sharp as they used to be. Its characterization of women isn't the only part of Majima Gaiden old and tired. The whole "here are 5 leaders of a secret cabal of an eccentric faction you need to contend with" bit is so overdone in Like a Dragon. They use it for every single big sub-story chain attached to one of their features. They used it twice in Infinite Wealth. It stinks. This boilerplate story structure removes stakes and novelty from whatever it is we're doing. This isn't a main scenario story, so it's not going to be very deep, but it could still be fresh. It could still be quirky in a different way at least. The Devil Flag Pirate sub-story had the potential to be kind of dark even. It opens with a young woman watching her father bleed out in front of her and vowing revenge. And then you think, oh dang, we might get good intensity out of this, before Captain Samurai and Mr. Ninja show up to ruin that whole possibility. I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about the less than great aspects of Majima Gaiden. Overall, I loved playing it, and I think Like a Dragon titles meeting my standards are becoming rarer over time. This is the first in a long while this series is speaking with sincerity. But it isn't exempt from my ongoing criticism of the series as a whole. I don't think acknowledging what I find frustrating takes away from what I enjoy about it. Sometimes there's certainly more of the former than the latter, but Majima Gaiden was a big reminder of why I fell in love with Like a Dragon to begin with. Which makes how some folks are reacting to it very funny. Post The Man Who Erased His Name, there's a definite shift in how people view this franchise. Based on the comments I get nowadays on my videos, I can tell people are starting to notice the cracks in the formula. Or rather, the materials for the formula are being replaced with less effective substitutes. I know at least one fellow Like a Dragon enthusiast recognizable on the internet who thought Majima Gaiden was a load of crap. I won't give you a name, but I saw their review, and even as much as I like this entry, I can't say they're wrong. This sounds like me patting myself on the back for seeing the edge of the cliff before everyone else, but it's kind of nice to see folks saying what I've been saying. It feels good. I'm sorry. But the majority of opinions on the series are largely unchanged. Sure, Majima Gaiden could truly be the last classic Like a Dragon, but does anyone care? Is any of what we've talked about in this video series important to most folks? Could it be time for fans to acknowledge and accept this series no longer operates under the same tenets and ask themselves if they want to stick along for the ride? Is this even worth investigating? Or should we start evaluating this series under completely different standards? It's something I'm personally interested in exploring for myself, hence all these videos, but it always leaves a bad taste in your mouth when a series you've enjoyed for a long time fundamentally changes direction. Still, there's always hope RGG Studio will see Majima Gaiden's strengths and try to reincorporate them back into the next big entry. A chance they'll realize Majima's pirate adventure is less about rewriting the book on who you are and more about adding new chapters with respect to what you've already written. Statements we've examined in this video don't inspire too much confidence, but it's not as if RGG Studio has completely strayed from the path. During a group Q&A, the gamer reports that Hiroyuki Sakamoto had this to say about Majima Gaiden's story.
We hope that the silliness of the ideas help draw people in, but then we also want to show people what a Like a Dragon tale can be by telling stories of people with strong beliefs, strong things they feel, creeds and ways of life, and then emotional connections between these people and having these dramatic stories.
When discussing the end to Majima Gaiden, Geek Culture reports Ryosuke Hori said this during a virtual group interview.
One of the main themes is that life goes on, so it'd be kind of lame if we didn't end on that note. That's why, in a number of ways, we wanted to make sure that it didn't feel like there was a sense of finality for any of the characters or their stories.
And in an interview with Game Central, Sakamoto said this when asked about the rising cost of games and the studio's heavy asset reuse.
The longer your development cycle, the bigger your budget, the higher and higher the risk gets when you're making a game, right? So the cost of, say, messing up when you have those large, big budget titles becomes much higher. But when you're releasing a bunch of more compact titles, the risk becomes a little more mitigated by the fact you're already creating another one that can cover. So even if you make a mistake in one title, you can learn from it and grow from it as a studio and as an individual developer, and find ways to overcome that deficit and then make a better game in the future. So it's a really good method for growing as a studio as a whole in terms of skills.
These are all sensible takes on the franchise and its development, but in conjunction with the statements we've already discussed, it creates an air of confusion. It gives me the impression RGG Studio isn't aware of what they hold in their hands. The qualities of Like a Dragon I enjoy are being viewed as a thing of the past, or something relegated to smaller, less important projects needing to fill in the gaps while the real entries get made. As if the studio wants to ignore what it's done in the past rather than contend with the complicated nature of having such a long-lived series. And I gotta be honest, I think I'd be okay if this was the last Like a Dragon, or at least the last time Like a Dragon reminds me of old school Yakuza.
極道の過去なんちゅう重いもん背負った桐生が病と戦い 俺らみたいに好き勝手生きてきたもんがピンピンしたまま還暦か。人間の寿命っちゅうのは不公平にできとるな。それでええねん。寿命があるからこそ踏み出せるもんもあるやろ。
We've had 20 years of this series doing its best to grow with the times, to adapt and rediscover itself, to enthrall us with powerful convictions and meaningful connections. But as it tries to offer itself to a new generation, it feels like RGG Studio is struggling to hold on to those old glories.
長すぎる人生、ずっと歩き続けられん。人は終わりがあるから必死に夢を追えるんや。そして夢を追い続けないでええように追いていくんや。追いながら叶えられんかった夢に思いを馳せて、それを次の奴らに託す。それでええんや。それが人生や。
If there's one thing Majima Gaiden gives me an impression of, it's that the folks who've been making this series since the start are beginning to accept this.
ええ大人が不老不死の宝なんぞ信じるわけがない。せやけど、それくらいアホな夢話がないと重い腰上げられへんからな。
This story about a man trying to stop the hands of time and then coming to terms with it feels like the storytellers have come to similar conclusions about their handling of the stories themselves.
頭打ったくらいじゃ、お前の夢は消えんかったわけや。桐生一馬を諦めたくないっちゅう夢を。
But it also feels like a potential to use what they've learned to create something new, to nurture some new idea inheriting the long history of their work, or to encourage others to create something of their own inspired by the ideas and stories RGG Studio has made.
けど、その薬をってのは夢を見れた。夢を目指して広い世界を足を踏み出せた。それで俺らの夢は次を生きる連中にそうやって託されるんやからね。
It sounds wild, but I think Majima Gaiden is the artists asking us to search for our own treasure, to chase dreams this series has opened the door for us to find. Basically, if you want something like a classic Like a Dragon to exist, then it's time to make it yourself. Because RGG Studio is ready to move on.
せやったらまた次の夢でも探しに行こうか。俺ら暇やからな。
It's time for something new. From them, from you, from us. It's in our hands now. It's our turn to tell the stories.
「ほな始めようか。半年前んとこから話すでな。